Chief Garrett Cole shoved the young woman's shoulder hard enough to spin her into the wall, and the whole comms tent went silent. "You want to know what people like you are worth out here?" he snarled, jabbing a finger an inch from Ava Collins's face. "Nothing. You carry cables. You fetch coffee. And when the shooting starts, you hide and pray the real soldiers keep you alive." She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just looked at him with those still, gray eyes, the eyes of a girl who had once watched her father drop a man from 900 yards without breathing hard. Before we go any further, if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and the secrets ordinary people carry into war, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from right now. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's begin. The heat at Forward Operating Base Liberty was the kind that got into a person's bones and stayed there. It was July in Afghanistan, and the sun didn't set so much as it retreated, leaving behind a dry, breathing warmth that clung to canvas and steel long after dark. Ava Collins had been on base 11 days, and in those 11 days, she had learned three things. She had learned which generator hummed loudest. She had learned which men to avoid at the chow line. And she had learned that Chief Garrett Cole hated her before he ever knew her name. "I asked you a question, Collins." She straightened slowly, one hand pressed flat against the plywood wall where he'd shoved her. Around them, the comms tent had gone quiet, the low chatter of the night shift dying into the electric hiss of radios and cooling fans. A young corporal named Diaz froze with a headset half off his ear. A sergeant pretended to study a clipboard he wasn't reading. Nobody moved to help her. Nobody ever did. "You didn't ask a question, Chief," Ava said. Her voice was even, almost gentle. "You made a statement." Cole's jaw tightened. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, with a face that had been sun-scarred and windburned across 3 continents. He'd done things most people only saw in movies, and he wore that history like armor. To him, the comms tent was where the war went to be babysat, and Ava, quiet, unremarkable, 24 years old, was everything he despised about the modern military. "Let me tell you how this works," he said, lowering his voice so only she and the men closest could hear. "Out there past that wire, there's people who want to kill us, every single day. And the only thing standing between them and you is guys like me. You understand, guys who bleed for this, not girls who play with was and think they're part of something." "I understand, Chief. Do you?" He stepped closer. "Because you look at me like you're bored, like this is beneath you. And that tells me you don't understand a damn thing." Avia said nothing. That was the trick, the thing her mother had taught her long before her father ever put a rifle in her hands. Silence is not weakness. Silence is a door you keep closed so no one sees what's behind it. And behind Ava's door was 7 years of something she had sworn never to open again. "Chief," a new voice cut across the tent, quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of rank. "That's enough." Cole didn't turn right away. He held Ava's gaze a beat longer just to make the point that he was choosing to stop, that no one was making him. Then he stepped back and turned toward the tent flap where Master Chief Donovan Reese stood with his arms folded and his eyes fixed on the scene like a man reading a story he already knew the ending to. "Master Chief," Cole said, "just having a talk with the new comms hand, making sure she knows the rules." "I'm sure she does." Reese's voice was low, gravelly, worn smooth by decades of shouting over gunfire and helicopter rotors. He was in his early 50s now, gray coming in at the temples, but he still moved like a much younger man, economical balance, never a wasted motion. "Walk with me, Chief. There's something at the TOC needs your eyes." It wasn't a request, and Cole knew it. He shot Ava one last look, something between contempt and warning. And then he was gone, boots crunching gravel into the dark. The tent exhaled. Corporal Diaz slid his headset back on. The sergeant found a reason to leave. And for a long moment, Master Chief Reese and Ava Collins simply looked at each other across the humming space. "You all right?" Reese asked finally. "I'm fine." He put his hands on you. "He shoved me. It's not the first time a man shoved me. Won't be the last." She turned back to her console, fingers moving over the equipment with an ease that looked almost bored. "It's handled, Master Chief." Reese watched her work. He'd been watching her since the day she arrived, and he couldn't have told anyone exactly why. There was just something in the way she moved. Something in the way her eyes flicked to the entrance every time the tent flaps stirred, cataloging who came and went before her conscious mind seemed to register it. something in the perfect, unhurried economy of her hands. He'd seen that before, a long, long time ago. Collins, he said, where'd you grow up? Her hands paused just for a fraction of a second. Anyone else would have missed it. Reese didn't. Montana, she said, mostly. Mostly. We moved around. My dad was Army. She resumed her work. You know how it is. I do. Reese stepped closer, lowering his voice. What was his name, your dad? And there it was again, that tiny hitch, that flicker of something behind the closed door. Ava turned in her chair and looked up at him, and for the first time since she had arrived at FOB Liberty, someone saw the door open just a crack. Why do you ask, Master Chief? Curiosity. He held her gaze. You remind me of somebody. Everybody reminds somebody of somebody. Not like this. Reese studied her face, the set of her jaw, the stillness in her eyes, the way she held herself like a coiled spring that had learned to look relaxed. Not like this. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The radios hissed. A generator coughed and caught. Somewhere out past the wire, a dog barked twice and went silent. Get some rest, Collins, Reese said at last, straightening. Long day tomorrow. Every day's a long day here, Master Chief. He almost smiled. That it is. He left her there in the humming dark, and as the tent flap fell shut behind him, Ava Collins let out a slow, controlled breath. She looked down at her own hands, steady, always steady, and for a moment she saw not the console in front of her, but a wide green valley in Montana, and a man's rough hand covering hers, adjusting her grip. Breathe out, Ava Bug, between heartbeats. That's when the world holds still. She closed her eyes, she opened them, and she went back to work. The mess hall at FOB Liberty served two things well and everything else badly. The two things were coffee and eggs, and by the grace of God, they were usually available together in the pre-dawn hours, when Ava preferred to eat before the crowds, before the noise. She sat alone at the end of a long table, a tray of powdered eggs and a cup of coffee that could strip paint in front of her when a shadow fell across the table and a young man dropped into the seat opposite without asking. You're the comms girl, he said, the one Cole's got a hard-on about. Ava looked up. The man was young, maybe 26, with a lean face and sharp, watchful eyes. He wore no rank insignia she could see, but he had the look, the specific, hard-earned look of a man who had spent a lot of time being very still in very dangerous places. You're a sniper, Ava said. He blinked, just once. Now, how'd you figure that? Your hands. You keep them below the table, and you're sitting with your back to the wall, angled so you can see both doors. She took a sip of coffee. You watch the room the way a man watches a valley. The young man leaned back slowly. Something moved behind his eyes. Surprise, recalculation, the sudden awareness that the person across from him was not who he'd assumed. Ethan Ward, he said. Sniper section. Ava Collins. Communications. Communications. He said the word like it tasted strange. Yeah, sure. He leaned forward again, elbows on the table. You know I've been doing this a while, Collins. Reading people. It's half the job, and I gotta tell you, you don't read like communications. No, Ava kept her voice light. What do I read like? Ethan studied her for a long moment. That's the thing, he said quietly. I can't tell, and I can always tell. Ava smiled, and it was a good smile, warm and ordinary and completely without depth. It was a smile she had practiced in a bathroom mirror for years. Maybe I'm just tired, she said. Everybody looks like something else when they're tired. Ethan didn't answer. He just watched her eat, and she let him, because she knew that people who watched eventually got bored and left. That was the other thing her mother had taught her in those last hard years after her father died. Be so ordinary that people forget to look. Be a closed door in a hallway full of open ones. But Ethan Ward didn't get bored. He kept watching, and when Ava finally rose to leave, he said one more thing that stopped her cold. You know my rifle's got a name carved in the stock, he said conversationally. Guy who owned it before me. Legend, they say. One of the best there ever was. Some folks say he never missed. Ava stood very still, tray in her hands. Collins, they called him. Ethan looked up at her, and his eyes were sharp as glass. Any relation? The mess hall seemed to tilt just slightly. The clatter of trays, the hum of voices, the smell of burnt coffee, all of it receded, and for one endless second, Ava Collins was 14 years old again, standing over a folded flag listening to a bugle play in the rain. Common name, she said. and she walked away before he could see her face. The mission briefing came down 2 days later. Ava sat in the back of the operations tent with the other support personnel, while Master Chief Reese stood at the front beside a map projected onto a stretched white sheet. The tent was packed, SEAL operators, comms, medics, logistics. The air smelled of sweat and machine oil and coffee gone cold. Chief Cole stood near the front with his arms crossed, and every so often his eyes drifted back to Ava with an expression that said he hadn't forgotten their conversation. "Listen up," Reese said, and the tent went quiet. "Tomorrow at 0400, we're running a convoy out to Observation Point Falcon. It's a resupply and relief rotation. We're pulling the current OP team and inserting a fresh one, plus dropping off ammunition and comms gear." He tapped the map. A thin ribbon of road wound through a stretch of high ground, threading between two ridgelines before opening into a shallow valley. "Route takes us through the Zargun Valley. Now, I know some of you have been here before. I know what you're thinking. This valley's got a history, and none of it's good." A murmur went through the tent. Reese let it settle. "Intel says it's quiet. Local elders have been cooperative. Traffic's been light. But I've been doing this a long time, and I'll tell you what I always tell you. Quiet is a weather report, not a promise. We move fast, we move smart, and we keep our eyes open." He turned to the assignments, operators to the vehicles, medics to the middle of the convoy, and then Collins. Ava looked up. "You're our forward relay. We'll be pushing comms range out at the far end of the valley, and terrain's going to break line of sight. I want you positioned here." He tapped a spot on the map, a low rise on the valley floor well ahead of where the convoy would halt. "To relay signal between the convoy and the OP. You'll have a two-man security element with you." Ava studied the map. Her eyes moved across it the way another person might read a paragraph left to right, top to bottom, absorbing, and what she saw made something cold settle in her stomach. The position Reese wanted her in was exposed. Low ground, minimal cover with high terrain on three sides. To a communications specialist, it was simply a relay point. But Ava Collins was not simply a communications specialist, and to the part of her mind that had never stopped seeing the world the way her father taught her, that little rise on the valley floor was something else entirely. It was a kill box. "Master Chief," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "Permission to speak." Reese looked at her, and something flickered across his weathered face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "Go ahead, Collins." "That relay position." She stood, and every head in the tent turned toward her. "Have we had eyes on the high ground around it, the ridges to the north and east?" A ripple went through the room. It was not a communications specialist question. Everyone felt it, even if they couldn't have said why. Cole snorted audibly. "You worried about the view, Collins?" A few of the operators chuckled. Ava didn't look at Cole. She kept her eyes on Reese. "I'm asking, Master Chief, because if someone wanted to ambush a convoy in that valley, that relay position is exactly where they'd want us to put someone. It draws the eye, it's isolated, and it sits in the crossfire of both ridgelines." She paused. "If the high ground's not clear, that's not a relay point. It's bait." The tent went dead silent. Reese stared at her for a long, long moment. He looked at the map. He looked at the position. He looked back at Ava Collins, 24 years old communications specialist, and he felt something crawl up at the back of his neck that he hadn't felt in 15 years. Because he had heard that exact assessment before. Not the words, the thinking. The way of reading terrain, not as ground, but as geometry, as a language of angles and lines of sight and killing distances. He had heard it from one man and one man only on a rooftop in Kuwait a lifetime ago. Your father would understand. "How?" Cole said, and his voice had changed. The mockery was gone, replaced by something harder. "How does a comms hand read terrain like that?" Ava realized her mistake a half-second too late. The door had opened. They had seen inside. "Basic land nav," she said, sitting back down, retreating, closing the door as fast as she could. "Every soldier learns it. I just paid attention." But it was too late, and she knew it. Ethan Ward, standing against the far wall, was looking at her the way a man looks at a puzzle whose pieces have suddenly clicked. Reese was looking at her the way a man looks at a ghost. And Cole was looking at her with a new and dangerous curiosity. "Basic land nav," Cole repeated slowly. "Right." Reese cleared his throat. "Collins raises a fair point," he said, and the tent turned back to him. We'll task a drone to sweep the ridgelines before we move the relay element forward. Good catch. He held Ava's gaze a beat longer than necessary. Real good catch. He moved on to the rest of the briefing, but the temperature in the tent had shifted and Ava could feel it. She had been invisible for 11 days. In the space of 30 seconds, she had become the most interesting person in the room. And that was the one thing she had promised her mother she would never let happen. After the briefing broke up, Ava lingered pretending to study her notes until the tent had mostly emptied. She was gathering her things when a shadow fell over her, and she looked up to find Master Chief Reese standing there alone. "Walk with me," he said. They walked out into the fading light past the motor pool out to the edge of the wire where the base gave way to the vast, indifferent dark of the Afghan night. Reese didn't speak until they were well away from any ears. "Daniel Collins," he said finally. Not a question. Ava stopped walking. The night wind pulled at her hair. Out beyond the wire, the mountains were a black shape against a purple sky, and somewhere out there in the dark, the valley waited. "You knew him," she said. "I did more than know him." Reese's voice was rough. "I served with him. Iraq, 91, Desert Storm. He was the best I ever saw, and I've seen a lot." He turned to face her, and I made him a promise. Ava's throat tightened. "What promise?" "That if anything ever happened to him, I'd watch over his daughter." Reese's eyes searched her face. "He talked about you all the time, you know. Ava Bug, he called you. Said you had the gift. Said you could see a valley like a chessboard when you were 9 years old. Said it scared the hell out of your mother." Ava looked away. The old grief rose in her like water, cold and familiar, and she pushed it down the way she had learned to push everything down. "He shouldn't have taught me," she said. "My mother was right. It's not a gift. It's a weight." "Is that why you're hiding?" "I'm not hiding. I'm a communications specialist." "Ava." Reese said her name gently, and it undid something in her hearing that name spoken by a man who had known her father. "I watched you read that map. I've seen 1,000 soldiers read 1,000 maps. Not one of them saw what you saw. You didn't learn that in basic land nav. You learned it from him." "He taught me to see," Ava said. Her voice was barely above a whisper now. "He said the gift was never about the rifle. It was about seeing the truth faster than anyone else, seeing where the danger was before it happened." She swallowed. "And then he died anyway, in a place he couldn't see coming, an IED on a road in Kandahar. All that gift, all that seeing, and he never saw the thing that killed him." Reese was silent for a moment. "That's not how it works, and you know it." "I promised my mother." Ava turned to face him, and there were tears standing in her eyes now, though her voice stayed steady. "On her deathbed, Master Chief. She held my hand and she made me swear I would never pick up a rifle again. Never. She'd already lost him. She couldn't stand the thought of losing me the same way. So I swore 7 years ago, and I've kept it. By becoming invisible. By staying alive." Ava wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, angry at herself for the tears. "You don't understand. When I have a rifle in my hands, I'm not me anymore. I'm him. And that man died. That man got his wife killed with worry and then left a 14-year-old girl standing over a flag. I won't be that. I won't." The wind moved between them. Far off a jackal called and another answered. "He didn't leave you," Reese said quietly. "He was taken. There's a difference. And your mother, God rest her, she was grieving. A grieving woman made a scared girl promise something no one should have to promise. That doesn't make it a law of nature, Ava. It makes it a wound." Ava didn't answer. She couldn't. "That relay position tomorrow," Reese went on. "You were right about it. It's bad ground. I'm going to push to move it, but the brass likes it because it's got line of sight to the OP. If I can't get it moved..." He stopped. "I want you to promise me something else." "I'm done making promises, Master Chief. Just one." He held her gaze. "If it goes bad out there, if it all comes apart, I want you to promise me you'll do whatever it takes to keep our people alive. Whatever it takes," he paused, "even if it means breaking the other promise." Ava stared at him. The request hung in the air between them, enormous and terrible. "I can't promise that," she whispered. "Then promise me you'll think about it," Reese said. "That's all. Just when the moment comes, if it comes, don't let a dead woman's fear kill living men. Think about what your father would want. That's all I'm asking." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked back toward the lights of the base, leaving Ava Collins alone at the edge of the wire, staring out at the mountains and the dark and the valley that waited beyond. She didn't sleep that night. She lay on her cot in the dark and listened to the base breathe around her, the generators, the distant radio chatter, the shuffle of the guards changing shift, and she thought about a green valley in Montana and a man's rough hand over hers and a voice saying, "Breathe out between heartbeats." That's when the world holds still. She thought about her mother's face, gaunt and gray on a hospital pillow, whispering, promise me you'll never." And she thought about the relay position on the valley floor, the low rise with the high ground on three sides and the cold, certain knowledge in her gut that told her in her father's voice that something was waiting out there in the Zargun Valley, patient as a spider, and that all the promises in the world would not stop it from coming. Chief Garrett Cole found her at the ammunition point before dawn. She was drawing her comms gear and a basic load, a rifle she didn't want, and hoped she wouldn't touch sidearm ammunition, going through the motions of a support soldier preparing to move out. The sky to the east was just beginning to gray. The base was stirring engines, coughing to life in the motor pool men, calling to each other in the pre-dawn cold. Collins. She turned. Cole stood a few feet away, geared up plates and helmet and rifle, looking every inch the operator he was. But his face was different than it had been in the comms tent. The contempt was still there, but it was tempered now by something else. Suspicion. And underneath the suspicion, though he would never have admitted it, the faintest thread of respect. "Chief, that thing in the briefing." He stepped closer. "The map. How'd you do that?" "I told you, land nav." "Don't." He shook his head. "Don't feed me that. I've had land nav drilled into me for 15 years, and I couldn't have called that ambush position the way you did. Neither could half the operators in that tent. So I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want a straight answer." His eyes bored into hers. "Who the hell are you?" Ava looked at him for a long moment. The sky brightened by a degree. Somewhere behind them, the convoy was forming up engines, rumbling men climbing into vehicles. "I'm nobody, Chief," she said quietly. "I'm just a comms hand who paid attention in class." Cole's jaw worked. "You know what I think? I think you're hiding something. And out here, people who hide things get people killed." He leaned in. "So let me tell you how it's going to go today, Ubais. You do your job, you relay your signals, and you stay the hell out of the way of the men who know what they're doing. You got that? I got it." "I mean it, Collins." His voice dropped. "This valley's killed better people than you. I've seen it. So whatever game you're playing, whatever it is you think you are, you leave it here on the base. Because out there," he jerked his chin toward the gate, toward the mountains, toward the waiting dark. "Out there, thinking you're something you're not is how you die." He held her gaze a moment longer, then turned and walked toward the convoy. Ava watched him go. She thought about telling him. She thought about saying, "I know exactly what that valley is, Chief. I knew it the moment I saw the map. And I'm more afraid of it than you are because I'm the only one here who can see how it's going to happen." But she didn't say any of that. She shouldered her gear and she walked to her assigned vehicle, and she climbed in beside a young security specialist named Torres, who nodded at her nervously and said, "First convoy." "No," Ava said, "but it's been a while." The vehicles rolled out through the gate as the sun broke over the mountains, 12 vehicles in a long armored line, engines growling, dust rising behind them in a golden plume. Ava sat in the back and watched the terrain slide past the compounds, the fields, the dry riverbeds, and her eyes never stopped moving, cataloging, measuring, reading. Ethan Ward was 3 vehicles ahead, and though she couldn't see him, she knew he was doing the same thing, reading the ground, because that was what snipers did. That was what her father had done every mile of every road, right up until the mile that killed him. She thought about the rifle in Ward's vehicle, the one with a name carved in the stock. Daniel Collins, Desert Storm 91. Her father's rifle somehow impossibly here in this valley, 3 vehicles away. She hadn't asked how it had come to be here. She hadn't dared. Some part of her was afraid that if she looked at it too closely, it would call to her, and she would not be able to refuse. The convoy climbed into the high ground. The road narrowed. The ridgelines rose up on either side, and the valley opened ahead, the Zargun Valley, wide and shallow and golden in the morning light, beautiful the way only dangerous things are beautiful. Reese's voice came over the radio. "All elements, this is 6. Eyes up. We're in the funnel now. Drone's showing the ridge is clear, but stay sharp. The drone's showing the ridge is clear. Ava's stomach tightened. She looked up at the northern ridge at the folds and shadows of the terrain, and she thought a drone shows you what's on the surface. It doesn't show you what's dug in. It doesn't show you what's patient. Master Chief, she said into her comms before she could stop herself. This is Relay. Recommend we hold the convoy at the valley mouth and dismount a team to clear the north ridge on foot before we push into the open. A pause, then Cole's voice tight with anger. Negative Relay. Stay in your lane. We've got a schedule to keep. Chief, the drone can't see Betty. I said stay in your lane, Collins. A hard edge now. Do your job. Reese's voice cut in calmer. Relay 6, your concerns noted. We'll keep it tight. Push through. Ava sat back. Her hands were steady. They were always steady, but her heart was pounding. And behind her eyes, she could see it the way she always saw things a half step ahead of the world. She could see the geometry of the valley laying itself out like a chessboard. The high ground, the relay position, the convoy strung out in the open. She could see where the shooters would be if there were shooters because there was only one place they could be, only one set of angles that made sense. And as the convoy rolled down into the valley floor and her vehicle peeled off to drop her at the relay position, the low-rise, the exposed ground, the kill box, Ava Collins looked up at the silent northern ridge, and she knew with a certainty that came from her father's blood in her veins that they were already out there, waiting, watching. The vehicle stopped. Torres and the other security specialist, a quiet corporal named Bishop, climbed out first, weapons up scanning. Ava followed, hauling her comms gear, and set up quickly on the little rise. Radio antenna relay equipment. Her hands did the work, while her eyes did something else entirely. 900 meters north the ridge. She studied it. There, a fold in the rock, a shadow that was a shade too deep, a place where the natural line of the terrain broke just slightly. Her father's voice patient in her memory. The land doesn't lie, Ava Bug. People lie. The land tells you the truth if you know how to read it. And the land was telling her something now. It was telling her that the shadow was not a shadow. Relay's up, she said into the comms, her voice calm. Signal's good. Convoy, you're clear to proceed to Falcon. Copy, Relay, came the reply. The convoy rolled forward deeper into the valley, strung out across the open ground, exactly the way it was never ever supposed to be. Ava watched it go. She watched the ridge. She felt the seconds stretch, each one a lifetime, and she thought about the promise to her mother and the promise Reese had asked for, and the rifle 3 vehicles away with her father's name carved into the stock. Torres crouched beside her, watching the terrain, nervous. You okay, Collins? You look, I don't know. You look like you're waiting for something. I am, Ava said quietly. For what? She didn't answer, because in that moment, high on the northern ridge 900 meters away, a shadow that was not a shadow shifted, a glint of light off glass there and gone, the land telling her the truth. Get down, Ava said. Torres blinked. What? Get down. The first shot cracked across the valley like the sky splitting open, and 7 years of silence ended in a single terrible sound. The round took Bishop high in the shoulder and spun him into the dirt. For one frozen instant, the whole valley seemed to hold its breath, and then it came apart all at once. The ridgelines lit up. Muzzle flashes bloomed along the high ground north and east, and the air filled with the vicious snap and whine of incoming fire. Down in the valley, the convoy lurched in scout-arid vehicles, slewing sideways, men bailing out into whatever cover they could find. And over the radio came the sounds every soldier dreads, the shouting, the confusion, the first raw edge of panic. Contact! Contact north and east. We're taking fire. We're taking... Man down, I got a man down. Ava Collins pressed herself flat against the low-rise Torres beside her, Bishop screaming somewhere to her left, and the whole world reduced to noise and dust and the terrible mathematics she had prayed she'd never have to do again. 10 shooters. She counted them by their muzzle flashes, by their reports, by the pattern of the fire, the way another person might count birds on a wire. 10 of them dug in on the high ground exactly where she had known they would be. The convoy was pinned, the SEALs were pinned, and down the valley 3 vehicles away, a rifle with her father's name on it lay waiting in the dirt. Reese's voice tore across the radio, hard and fast. All elements. 6 air supports grounded, weather socked in at the airfield, QRFs 45 out. We hold, find cover, and return fire. 45 minutes. Ava closed her eyes. She saw the geometry of the valley, the angles of the ridges, the killing lines, all of it laid out in her mind as clear as a map. And she knew with cold and total certainty that in 45 minutes there would be no one left to save. Ava, a voice in her ear, Reese on a private channel, his voice low and urgent beneath the chaos. I can see it too. We're not gonna make 45. Ward's hit Cole's about to be overrun and I'm out of options. A pause filled with gunfire. Your father would understand. It's time. Make your call. Ava Collins opened her eyes. Down the valley through the smoke and the dust and the screaming, she could see it now, a rifle in the dirt beside a wounded man, and carved into its stock, catching the morning light, a name she had spent 7 years running from. And between her and that rifle lay 100 meters of open ground, swept by fire where no sane person would ever go. She thought of her mother's hand in hers. Promise me. She thought of her father's hand over hers. Breathe out between heartbeats. She thought of 10 men on a ridge in 45 minutes and the living dying soldiers strung out across the valley floor. And Ava Collins, daughter of the ghost, made her choice. She moved. There was no decision left to make. Not really. The decision had been made 7 years ago in a hospital room, and then unmade in the space between one heartbeat and the next, and out here in a valley full of dying men. Ava Collins came up off the ground and she ran. Collins! Torres screamed behind her. Collins, what are you doing? Get back! But she was already gone, sprinting across the open ground toward the vehicle, 3 positions down toward the wounded man in the dirt, toward the rifle with her father's name on it. The air around her came alive with fire. Rounds quick past her head, kicked up gouts of dirt at her heels, whined off the armor of the vehicles. She heard someone shouting her name over the radio. She heard the enemy fire shift tracking her. 10 shooters suddenly aware that something was moving across their kill box that shouldn't be. She didn't slow down. She didn't zigzag the way they teach you. She ran a line her father had taught her in the woods of Montana, a line that read, the ground that used every dip and fold and shadow, a line that shouldn't have worked and did. Breathe out between heartbeats. Her feet found the earth. Her body remembered things her mind had tried to forget. Ethan Ward was down behind the 3rd vehicle, and he was bad. A round had caught him in the thigh high up, and the blood was coming fast, too fast, pooling dark in the dust beneath him. His face was gray. His rifle lay a few feet away where he'd dropped it when he fell. Ava slid in beside him in a spray of gravel, and Ethan's eyes rolled toward her glassy with shock and pain. Collins, he rasped. The hell you're not. You're supposed to be. Save your strength. Her hands were already moving, tearing open his med kit, finding the tourniquet, cinching it high and hard around his thigh above the wound. He screamed. She didn't stop. You're gonna live, Ward. You hear me? You're gonna live, but I need your rifle. His eyes found hers, and even through the pain, even through the shock, something in them sharpened. Understanding. Collins, he breathed. That name in the stock. Daniel Collins. That's my father. She finished the tourniquet, checked it, then reached for the rifle. Her hand closed around the stock, and she felt the carved letters under her fingers worn smooth by years, and by another hand that had held this weapon long before her. It's my father's rifle, Ward, and I'm about to do the thing I swore I'd never do. She looked down at him. Stay awake, keep pressure on that leg, and whatever happens in the next few minutes. Her voice caught just slightly. Don't tell anyone what you're about to see. Ethan Ward, sniper, one of the best in his section, looked up at the communications specialist who had just run through open fire to save his life, and he understood that he was about to witness something he would spend the rest of his life trying to explain. Do it, he whispered. Whatever you are, do it. Ava Collins pulled the rifle to her shoulder, and the world went quiet. It was the strangest thing, the way it always came back. 7 years, and it came back in an instant, like it had never left, like it had only been sleeping. The noise of the battle didn't stop the gunfire, the screaming, the chaos, but it receded, pushed to the edges, muffled behind glass. What filled the center was stillness. Cold, clear, terrible stillness. The stillness her father had lived in. The stillness he had died in. She dropped, prone, behind the vehicle's engine block, the rifle settling into her shoulder, like it had been made for her, and she put her eye to the scope. The northern ridge leapt toward her, and she began to read. Wind first, the way her father taught her. Always the wind first. She watched the dust drift, watched the dry grass bend on the far slope, and she felt it on her own cheek. And she did the math without doing the math, the way you catch a ball without calculating its arc. A quartering wind left to right, maybe 8 knots gusting. She dialed it in. Her fingers moved on the scope with a certainty that came from 10,000 hours she tried to pretend she'd never spent. Distance next. The first shooter, the one who'd hit at Bishop, the one nearest to the top of the fold in the rock. She ranged him, 340 meters elevated, firing down. She adjusted her hold. Her breathing slowed, slowed. Down the line over the radio, she heard Cole's voice, ragged, now stripped of all its swagger. "We're getting cut to pieces out here. 6 we need something, anything." And Reese, quiet calm, watching from behind a vehicle, 200 meters back. Watching Ava through his own optic, with tears standing in his eyes. "Steady, Chief, steady, help's already here." Ava found the first shooter in her scope. A man in gray dug into the rock, working his rifle, methodically picking targets in the convoy below. He had no idea that 900, no 340 meters away, a ghost was watching him. Breathe out, Ava Bug. Between heartbeats. That's when the world holds still. She breathed out. The world held still. She squeezed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder in old familiar violence, and 340 meters away, the first shooter simply stopped. Stopped working his rifle. Stopped being a threat. Stopped being a man. He slumped forward against the rock and did not move again, and the fire from his position ceased as if a switch had been thrown. Ava was already moving to the next. She didn't think about the man she'd just killed. There wasn't room. Her father had taught her that too, and the hardest lesson of all, the one her mother had hated him for. When you take the shot, you don't carry the man. You carry the ones you saved. You do the grief later. In the moment, there is only the work. And so she did the work. She shifted her aim, found the second muzzle flash, a shooter on the move along the ridge, a harder target sliding between 2 rocks. She led him. Wind distance movement, all of it folding together in her mind in less than a second. She breathed out. She squeezed. The second shooter dropped mid-stride. 2. Down in the valley, something began to change, though no one understood it yet. The volume of incoming fire, which had been building toward a crescendo, faltered. One position went silent, then another. The SEALs, pinned and bleeding, felt the pressure ease by a fraction and didn't know why. Cole felt it. He was crouched behind a shattered vehicle, his own rifle hot in his hands, and he'd been certain, genuinely certain, in a way he hadn't been in years, that he was about to die in this valley. And then impossibly, the fire slackened. He risked a look over the hood, and he saw it, a shooter on the ridge, one of the enemy jerking backward and going still with no one anywhere near him. "What?" he breathed. "Who's?" He keyed his radio. 6. Someone's engaging the ridge. "We got a shooter working the high ground." "Who is that? Who do we have up there?" Silence on the radio, then Reese's voice, thick with something Cole couldn't name. "Just keep your head down, Chief, and thank God." Ava found the third shooter. This one was partially covered, only his head and one shoulder visible above a lip of rock. A difficult shot, the kind of shot that separated good snipers from great ones. Her father had drilled her on shots like this in the Montana woods, made her take them again and again, until she wept with frustration, until she got them, until she couldn't miss them. "A body's easy, Ava Bug," he'd said. "Anyone can hit a body. But the truth of you comes out on the hard shots. That's where the gift lives." She settled. She breathed. The world held still. She squeezed. 380 meters away, the third shooter's head snapped back, and he vanished behind the rock, and the fire from his position stopped forever. 3. Now the enemy knew. Now they understood that something was wrong, that they were being hunted, that their perfect ambush had a hole in it they couldn't see. Ava watched through her scope as their fire grew ragged, as heads that had been steady and confident began to duck and scan, searching for the source of the death that was picking them apart from the valley floor. She saw the confusion spread through them like a virus. They were looking for a team, a whole element of shooters, because no single rifle could do what was being done to them. They were looking in all the wrong places. Because Ava Collins had learned at her father's knee the thing the enemy would never understand, that one person who could truly see was worth more than 10 who could only shoot. "Torres," she said into her comms, her voice flat and calm as still water. "Bishop, still breathing. A crackle. Torres stunned from back at the relay position. He's breathing. I got the bleeding stop. But Collins, what are you? How are you? Keep him alive, Ava said. I'm working. She shifted her aim east. Because there were two ridges, and she couldn't forget the second one, and the fourth shooter was over there on the eastern high ground, drawing a bead on a cluster of seals pinned behind a burning vehicle. Ava swung the rifle reread, the wind differ, print, angle now, different values she adjusted without a wasted motion, and found him in her scope just as his finger tightened on his trigger. She was faster. She breathed out. She squeezed. The fourth shooter died with his shot half taken, his round going wide into the dirt instead of into the back of a 22-year-old SEAL named Petrowski, who would go home to Ohio and never know how close he'd come. 9 minutes had passed since the first shot. 9 minutes. It felt to everyone in that valley like 9 hours, and it felt to Ava Collins like no time at all, like a single held breath, like the whole 7 years of silence compressed into one unbroken moment of terrible clarity. Reese watched her through his optic, and he was weeping openly now, and he didn't care who saw. Because he had known her father. He had stood beside Daniel Collins on rooftops and ridgelines across 2 wars, had watched the man work, had believed he would never see anything like it again as long as he lived. And here it was, here she was, the same impossible stillness, the same reading of the wind in the ground, in the geometry of death. The gift passed down dormant for 7 years, and now awake and terrible in the hands of a 24-year-old girl everyone had dismissed as invisible. My God, Danny, Reese whispered to a dead man, she's you. She's better than you. The 5th shooter and the 6th were working together. Ava saw coordinating their fire a 2-man team on the northern ridge trying to pin down the last of the convoy's cohesion. She watched their rhythm. Everything has a rhythm, her father used to say. The wind has a rhythm. A man's breathing has a rhythm. Even a firefight has a rhythm if you're still enough to hear it. She listened to theirs. One would fire, then the other, then the first, again a metronome of violence. And in the gap between them, in the half-second when the first was working his bolt, she took him. 5. The 6th shooter froze a fatal hesitation, that flicker of human panic when your partner dies beside you and you don't understand how. And in that flicker, Ava took him too. 6. Down in the valley, Chief Garrett Cole had stopped firing. He was simply watching now, crouched behind cover, watching the ridgeline where the enemy was dying one by one, and a feeling was growing in him that he could not name, a feeling made of equal parts awe and shame, because he thought he knew where the fire was coming from now. He'd traced the angles. He'd done the geometry, crude and slow, compared to the mind that was actually doing the work, but he'd gotten there. The shots were coming from the relay position, from the low rise, from the exposed ground where he'd told a communications specialist to stay in her lane and keep her head down. No, he said out loud to no one. No, that's not. He keyed his radio. 6, tell me, that's not the comms girl. Tell me that is not Collins on that rifle. A long silence. Then Reese, and his voice broke as he said it. That's the ghost's daughter, Chief. That's Daniel Collins's little girl. And she's saving every one of your lives right now. Cole sat down hard behind the vehicle. He put his back against the armor, and he stared at nothing. And he thought about the comms tent, about shoving her into the wall, about you carry cables, you fetch coffee, about you hide and pray, the real soldiers keep you alive. He thought about telling her that very morning that thinking you're something you're not is how you die. And the shame of it rose up in him so hot and so total that for a moment he could barely breathe. Out on the ridge, the 7th shooter died. 7. Ava was in it now, all the way in a place beyond thought and beyond memory and beyond grief, a place her father had lived in and tried to describe to her once late at night by a fire in the mountains. It's not about being cold, Ava Bug. People think it's about being cold, about not feeling anything. It's the opposite. It's about feeling everything and moving anyway. Feeling the weight of it and not letting the weight stop your hand. That's the gift. That's the curse. They're the same thing. She hadn't understood him then. She was 12. She understood him now. Because she felt everything. She felt the men she was killing, felt each one as a life she was ending, and she did not let it stop her hand. And she felt the men she was saving, felt them out there in the valley. Ethan bleeding beside her. Bishop breathing back at the relay, Petrowski, who would go home to Ohio Cole sitting stunned behind his vehicle. All of them alive, 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 because she was doing the things she'd sworn she would never do. 3 shooters left. The 8th was smart. He'd figured it out or gotten close, and he'd stopped firing. Gone to ground, was trying to relocate to a position where he could get an angle on the relay rise. Ava tracked him by the disturbance he made in the terrain, by the way the dust moved, by the tiny wrongnesses in the landscape that only she could read. The land doesn't lie, Ava Bug. She waited. She was patient. She had all the patience in the world because she had her father's patience, the patience of a man who could lie motionless for 11 hours to take a single shot. The 8th shooter rose just for a moment just to make his move. She took him. 14 minutes. The 9th and 10th shooters were the last, and they knew it. Now knew they were the only 2 left, where there had been 10, and something broke in them. Ava saw it through the scope. She saw them lose their nerve. She saw them abandon their positions, saw them start to move, no longer thinking about the ambush, no longer thinking about the convoy, thinking only about the ridge behind them and the safety of the far slope, and getting away from the thing in the valley that could not be seen and could not be stopped and was killing them all. The 9th shooter broke cover to run. Ava breathed out. The world held still. She squeezed. 9. And now there was one. One shooter, the last of 10, a man who 20 minutes ago had been part of a perfect trap, a killing machine positioned exactly right, certain of victory. And now he was running for his life across the open slope of the eastern ridge alone, terrified, with no idea what had done this to him or where it would come from next. Ava tracked him in her scope, a running man at 410 meters, quartering away the hardest shot of all. Her father's voice from the deepest part of memory. The truth of you comes out on the hard shots. That's where the gift lives. She could let him go. Some part of her, the part that had made a promise to a dying woman, wanted to let him go. He was running away. He was no longer a threat. She could let him crest that ridge and vanish, and no one would ever fault her for it. But she thought about the convoy that would come through this valley next week and the week after. She thought about the ambush he would set, the next time wiser, now more careful. She thought about the men he would kill because she had let him go. You don't carry the man, Ava Bug. You carry the ones you saved. She let him. She read the wind one last time. She breathed out, and the world held still. And in that stillness, she heard her father's voice and her mother's voice and Reese's voice all at once. And she heard her own voice underneath them, all clear and certain for the first time in 7 years. She squeezed. 410 meters away, the 10th and last shooter fell and did not rise. 10. And then there was silence. Real silence. Total silence. The silence that comes after when the guns stop and the echoes die and the valley holds its breath. Ava Collins lay behind the engine block of a shattered vehicle, her father's rifle warm against her shoulder, and she did not move. She kept her eye to the scope. She scanned the ridgelines north and east, looking for movement, looking for a threat she'd missed because her father had taught her that the shot after you think you're done is the one that kills you. She scanned for a full minute, 2. Nothing moved on the high ground. Nothing moved at all. 18 minutes. From the first shot to the last 18 minutes. Slowly all across the valley, men began to rise. SEALs came up out of cover, weapons still up, disbelieving, staring at the silent ridges where moments ago death had been raining down on them. Medics scrambled to the wounded. Radios crackled to life with dazed voices, calling casualty reports, calling all clears, calling for the QRF that was still 30 minutes out and would arrive to find a battle already over, already won, by a single rifle they couldn't account for. Beside Ava, Ethan Ward stirred, his face still gray, the tourniquet holding his life still in him. His eyes were open and they were fixed on her, and in them was an expression she had never seen on another human face before, a kind of holy terror, the look of a man who has seen something he lacks the words for. 10, he breathed. You got Collins, you got all 10. By yourself, in... He couldn't finish. Ava lowered the rifle. Her hands, which had been so steady, so perfectly steady, began very slightly to shake. Now that it was over, now that the work was done and the grief could come, she looked down at the rifle in her trembling hands, at the letters carved in the stock, worn smooth by her father's grip, and now warm from her own. Daniel Collins, Desert Storm 91. Yeah, she said quietly. I did. And then the tears came silent, streaming down her dust-caked face, and she didn't wipe them away. She let them come. because she was crying for the men she'd killed and the men she'd saved. She was crying for the promise she'd broken and the one she'd kept. She was crying for her mother gone 7 years, who had made a scared girl swear an oath out of love and grief. And she was crying for her father, the ghost, who had put a rifle in her hands and taught her to see the truth faster than anyone else, and who would have understood. God help her, he would have understood everything. Footsteps running from up the valley. She heard them and she didn't turn. She knew the gate. She'd cataloged it 11 days ago in a comms tent. Master Chief Donovan Reese slid to a stop beside her and Ethan, and for a moment the hard old SEAL couldn't speak at all. He just looked at her, at the rifle in her hands, at the tears on her face, and his own face crumpled. "Ava," he finally managed. "Ava, I... He stopped. He tried again. "I've been doing this 30 years. 30 years, and I've never..." His voice broke completely. "Your daddy would be so proud. He'd be so damn proud of you, girl." Ava looked up at him. "He'd be sad then," she said softly. "That's what nobody understands. He wouldn't be proud. He'd be sad that I had to." A tear traced down through the dust on her cheek. That's the part he never told anyone. Every time he did this, it made him sad. Not proud. Sad. Because the gift isn't about being good at killing, Master Chief. He told me that when I was a kid, and I didn't understand. Her voice steadied. The gift is about seeing the truth faster than anyone else, and acting before hesitation kills the people you love. That's all it ever was. The rest is just the price. Reese knelt there beside her, this legend of the teams, this man who had killed and bled across 3 decades of war, and he had no answer for her because he understood suddenly and completely that the 24-year-old communications specialist kneeling in the dust had understood something about their whole terrible profession that he had spent his entire life avoiding. A shadow fell across them. Ava looked up. Chief Garrett Cole stood over her. He had come up the valley on foot, and his rifle hung slack at his side, and his hard, sun-scarred face was a ruin of an expression Ava had never seen on it. Not contempt, not suspicion, not the casual cruelty he'd shown her in the comms tent. Something else entirely. Something like grief. Something like awe. Something underneath it all, like shame so deep it had hollowed him out. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He looked at her, and he looked at the ridgelines where 10 men lay dead by her hand, and he looked at the rifle with the carved name, and Ava watched him do the math, watched him understand, watched the full weight of it land on him. "Collins," he said. His voice was hoarse. He stopped. He didn't have the words. This man who had always had words, who had used them like weapons, who had shoved her into a wall and told her she was worth nothing, he stood there in the aftermath of the things she had done, and he had nothing. He tried again. "This morning, at the ammo point, I told you." His jaw worked. "I told you that thinking you're something you're not is how you die." "I remember, Chief," Ava said quietly. "I was wrong." The words came out of him like something being torn loose. "God, I was so wrong. About you, about all of it." He looked at the ridge again, at the dead, and his voice dropped to almost nothing. "You saved my life. You saved every life in this valley." And He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. Ava rose slowly to her feet, her father's rifle in her hands, and she faced him. 24 years old communications specialist, the daughter of the ghost. She looked at Garrett Cole, the man who had despised her, the man who now stood before her, stripped of everything he'd thought he knew, and there was no triumph in her face. There was no anger. There was only a tired, ancient sadness that made her look in that moment far older than her years. "You didn't know," she said. "That's all right, Chief. Nobody knew. That was the point." Cole shook his head slowly. "Who are you?" he asked. But it was a different question now than it had been that morning. That morning it had been an accusation. Now it was something closer to a prayer. And before Ava could answer, Master Chief Reese answered for her, rising to his feet beside her. One weathered hand coming to rest on her shoulder, his voice carrying across the silent valley for everyone to hear. Her name, Reese said, is Ava Collins. Her father was Staff Sergeant Daniel Collins. Call sign, Ghost, the finest sniper this Army ever produced. I served with him for 15 years, and I made him a promise the night before I shipped home from the Gulf that if anything ever happened to him, I'd look after his little girl. His hand tightened on her shoulder. I've been trying to keep that promise for 7 years, and I want every single one of you to understand something." He looked around at the SEALs gathering now, the survivors, the men and women who owed their lives to the girl standing before them. "I didn't save her today. She saved us, all of us. And the finest thing I ever did in 30 years of soldiering was just to be standing next to her when she finally remembered who she is." The valley was silent, and Ava Collins looked down at the rifle in her hands at her father's name carved in the stock, and she understood at last that the door she had kept closed for 7 years would never close again. That the girl who had made herself invisible was gone. That the promise to her mother was broken and could not be unbroken. And that a different promise, older and deeper, written in her blood before she was ever born, had finally been kept. She had broken her mother's promise, but she had fulfilled her father's legacy. And as the wind moved through the Zarghun Valley carrying the dust of the fallen, up toward the silent ridges, Ava Collins lifted her face to the mountains and let the tears fall. And somewhere she was certain, in whatever country lies beyond this one, a man called Ghost was watching his daughter, and he was not proud. He was sad, because he understood better than anyone who ever lived exactly what it had cost her. And he understood, too, that she would never be invisible again. The QRF arrived 31 minutes after the last shot, and they came in hard and fast, expecting a fight, expecting to find a convoy in pieces and an enemy still on the ridges. Instead, they found a valley gone quiet, 10 dead shooters on the high ground, a line of battered vehicles wounded being treated in the dust, and a communications specialist sitting alone on the tailgate of a truck with a rifle across her knees and 1,000 miles in her eyes. The QRF commander, a young captain named Holbrook, climbed out of his vehicle and stood there trying to make sense of it. He'd been briefed on a 10-man ambush from elevated terrain. He'd been told air support was down and the convoy was pinned. He'd pushed his men through 30 minutes of hard driving, certain he was going to arrive too late to do anything but count the bodies of his own. "Master Chief," he said, finding Reese, "what in God's name happened here? Where's the element that cleared those ridges? How many shooters did you have on the high ground?" Reese looked at him for a long moment. "One," he said. Holbrook blinked. "One what?" "One shooter." Reese's voice was flat, tired, and absolutely certain. "One rifle. Cleared all 10 enemy positions across 2 ridge lines in 18 minutes. 0 friendly casualties after she started working." The captain laughed a short, disbelieving sound and then stopped when he saw Reese's face. "Master Chief, that's not possible. One shooter doesn't clear a 10-man ambush from elevated dug-in positions. Nobody does that. That doesn't happen." "It happened," said a voice. Both men turned. Chief Garrett Cole had walked up, and his face was still that ruined thing it had become, that hollowed-out mask of shame and awe. "I watched it happen, Captain. From 200 meters, 10 targets, 1 rifle. And if you tell me it's not possible, I'll tell you I don't care what's possible anymore. Because I was there, and I'm alive, and the only reason I'm alive is her." He pointed at the tailgate at the small figure sitting alone with a rifle across her knees. "So maybe rethink what's possible." Holbrook looked over at Ava Collins. He studied her, the plain uniform, the comms specialist kit, the utterly unremarkable appearance of her, and something in his face struggled and failed to reconcile what he was seeing with what he was being told. "Her," he said quietly. She's a comms hand. It says so right on her." "Her name is Ava Collins," Reese said. "Her father was the finest sniper this army ever produced. And I'd suggest, Captain, that before you file whatever report you're going to file, you come talk to me. Because there's a right way to tell this story and a wrong way, and I've spent 30 years watching the Army do it the wrong way." His voice hardened. "Not this time." Holbrook heard something in that voice that made him decide wisely to stop asking questions in the open. "Yes, Master Chief," he said. We'll get the wounded loaded. We'll sort the rest at the base." They loaded the wounded. Ethan Ward went out on a litter still gray but stable, the tourniquet holding his life saved by the tourniquet Ava had cinched and the shots she'd taken. As they carried him past her, he reached out one weak hand and caught her sleeve, and she leaned down to hear him. "Collins," he whispered. "The rifle." His eyes flicked to the weapon across her knees. "It's yours. It should have always been yours. I don't know how I ended up carrying your daddy's rifle, but it found its way to you. You understand, some things find their way home." His hand fell away. "Keep it." Ava's throat closed. She nodded, unable to speak, and watched them carry him to the helicopter. Bishop went out too, the security specialist who'd been hit in the first seconds, the one Torres had kept alive with pressure and prayer. As they loaded him, he was conscious enough to look at Ava, and he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "That was you, on the ridge. That was you." And when she didn't answer, he said it again, like he needed the world to confirm it. "That was you." Torres came and sat beside her on the tailgate after the birds lifted off. For a long time, the young security specialist didn't say anything. He just sat there, his hands still shaking, the adrenaline draining out of him, and leaving behind the deep bone-level tremor of a man who had been certain he was about to die, and then impossibly hadn't. "I told you to get back," he finally said. "When you ran, I thought you'd lost your mind. I thought I was watching you commit suicide." He turned to look at her. "And then you, Collins? I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen anything like it in my life. You ran through all that fire like it wasn't even there. Like you knew. Like you knew exactly where every round was going to be." "I did," Ava said quietly. Torres stared at her. "How?" She looked out at the ridgelines, at the mountains beyond. "My father taught me," she said, "a long time ago, in the woods back home. He taught me how to run a line that reads the ground, how to move so the fire can't find you." She was quiet a moment. "I hadn't done it in 7 years. I thought I'd forgotten how." She looked down at her hands. "You never forget. That's the terrible thing. You never forget." 40 minutes after the QRF arrived, the convoy formed up again, and they drove out of the Zargan Valley, and Ava Collins sat in the back of a truck with her father's rifle across her knees and did not look back at the ridges where 10 men lay dead. She looked forward. She looked at the road, and she felt the 7 years of silence closing behind her forever. A door slamming shut on the girl she'd pretended to be, and she felt the fear of what waited on the other side, because she knew what came next. She'd grown up in the Army. She knew how it worked. There would be reports. There would be questions. There would be officers she'd never met wanting to understand how a communications specialist had done a thing that trained snipers train their whole lives to be able to do and mostly never manage. And underneath all of it, she knew there would be the thing she dreaded most, the light, the attention, the end of her invisibility. The exact thing she had promised her mother she would never allow. "Promise me, Ava," her mother's voice thin and desperate on the hospital pillow. "Promise me you'll never pick up a rifle again. I can't bury you too. I can't. Promise me. I promise, Mama." And she had kept that promise for 7 years, and she had broken it in 18 minutes. And now she was driving back toward a base and a life where everyone would know and nothing would ever be invisible again. FOB Liberty looked different when they rolled back through the gate, or maybe Ava looked at it differently. The base hadn't changed, but she had, and everything she saw now seemed to carry the weight of what had happened out in the valley. Word had already spread, of course. Word always spread faster than the convoy. By the time the vehicles halted in the motor pool, there was a crowd, and the crowd was looking at one truck and one person in it. Ava climbed down with the rifle in her hands, and the crowd went quiet. She'd spent 11 days making herself invisible on this base. 11 days of not speaking too much, not drawing attention, being the closed door in the hallway. And now every eye was on her, and the silence had a texture to it, a weight, a mixture of disbelief and awe, in the particular hunger people have when they're near someone who's done something they can't imagine doing. She didn't like it. She'd never liked it. It was the thing she'd been running from her whole adult life. Master Chief Reese appeared at her side, and without a word, he began walking, and she fell into step beside him, and the crowd parted, and he walked her through it, this old lion of the teams shielding her with his presence, taking her out of the light and toward the quiet of the operations tent. Inside, it was cooler and dim and empty, and Reese let out a long breath and turned to face her. "They're going to want to debrief you," he said. "Command, probably higher than command. What you did out there." He shook his head. "There's going to be a lot of people who want to understand it, and a lot of people who won't believe it even after you explain it. I know. There's going to be paperwork. Awards, maybe. There's going to be talk about reclassifying you, about pulling you out of comms and putting you where—" "No." The word came out of Ava hard and fast, and it surprised them both. "No, I'm not going to be that. I did what I had to do to keep those men alive. That's all. That's the beginning and the end of it. I'm not going to let them turn me into a weapon. They point at things." Reese studied her. That's your daddy talking. Maybe? No, I mean it. He sat down heavily on a folding chair. That's exactly what he said to me once. Word for word, damn near. We were in Kuwait '91 and the brass wanted to write him up, make a big thing of him, put him in the recruiting posters. The ghost. Zero misses. And he said no. He said the same thing you just said. He said, I'm not going to let them turn me into a weapon. They point at things. Reese's eyes were far away. And you want to know what happened? They did it anyway. They couldn't put him on a poster, so they did the next thing. They made him a legend inside the teams, made his name into a thing you whispered. And every time there was a shot nobody else could make, they came to Danny Collins. Every time, for 15 years. Because once they knew what he could do, they couldn't unknow it. He looked at her. That's what's about to happen to you, Ava. And I don't know how to stop it. I couldn't stop it for him. Ava sat down across from him, the rifle across her knees. She was quiet for a long time. Tell me about him, she finally said. The way you knew him, not the way I knew him. I was a kid. I knew my dad. I didn't know the man you knew. And so Reese told her. He told her about a young sergeant in the Gulf who could read a battlefield like other men read a newspaper. He told her about the shot at Kafji, the one that saved a whole recon element 400 meters in a sandstorm with the wind gusting to 30 knots a shot that shouldn't have been possible, and that Danny Collins made without seeming to think about it. He told her about the nights, the long, boring, dangerous nights, lying in a hide, waiting for a target that might never come, and how Danny would talk quiet in the dark about his little girl back in Montana. Ava Bug, he called her. Said she had the gift. Said he could already see it in her when she was 6 years old, the way she'd watch the world, the way she'd notice things, the way she was always 3 steps ahead. Said it scared him. Scared him, Ava said softly. It scared him to death. Reese's voice was gentle. Because he knew what the gift cost. He'd paid the price for it every single day of his life. The sadness, the weight, the way it separates you from people because you're always seeing the truth faster than everyone around you, and the truth is usually hard, and there's no one to share it with. He didn't want that for you, but he also, Reese hesitated. He also couldn't help himself. Because you had it, and he saw it, and he was the only one who could teach you how to carry it. So he did. He taught you, and then he tried to teach you when to put it down. Reese leaned forward. Did he ever tell you why he taught you the real reason? Ava shook her head slowly. He told me once. He said, Donnie, I'm not teaching her to shoot. I'm teaching her to see. Because she's got the seeing whether I teach her or not. That's in her blood, and there's no taking it out. So I'd rather she learn to see clearly and carry it right than have it half-formed and let it eat her alive. The rifle's just the last part. The seeing is the whole thing. Reese's eyes were wet. He said, if I do this right, she'll never have to pick up a rifle. She'll see the trouble coming so far ahead that she'll never be caught the way I get caught. She'll see it and she'll turn away from it. That's what I want for her, to see it coming and be able to walk away. Ava's tears were falling now, silent, unstoppable. He wanted me to walk away, she whispered. He wanted you to be able to walk away, Reese said. That's different. He wanted you to have the choice, and today, his voice broke. Today you had the choice, Ava. You could have stayed in that comms hole. You could have kept your promise to your mama. You could have let those men die and told yourself it wasn't your fight. Nobody would have blamed you. You were a comms specialist. It wasn't your job. He reached out and put his weathered hand over hers. But you looked at that valley and you saw the truth faster than anyone else, and you acted before hesitation killed the people who needed you. And that, he squeezed her hand. That's the gift, Ava. Not the shooting, the choosing. Your daddy would understand every part of it. The breaking of the promise and the keeping of it. He'd understand it all. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The tent was quiet. Outside, the base went about its business, the generators humming the radios, murmuring life going on the way it always did. I need to tell you something, Ava said finally, about my mother, about the promise. Reese waited. When she was dying, Ava stopped, gathered herself, went on. When she was dying, she made me promise I'd never pick up a rifle again. And I always thought for 7 years, I always thought it was because she was afraid I'd die. Like Dad died. That she couldn't bear to lose me the same way. She looked up. But that's not the whole truth. I figured it out later, years later. The real reason that she made me promise, her voice wavered. It wasn't just that she was afraid I'd die. It was that she was afraid I'd become him. Not die like him, become like him, carry what he carried. The sadness, the weight, the way it hollowed him out on the inside in the places she couldn't reach. A tear traced down her face. She used to say, I lost your father a long time before that road in Kandahar. I lost him to the gift. It took him away from me piece by piece, every mission, every shot, and by the end, there was a wall in him I couldn't get past. And she looked at me, and she saw the same thing starting in me, even at 17, and Ava's voice cracked. She wasn't trying to keep me alive, Master Chief. She was trying to keep my soul. She was trying to keep me from disappearing behind a wall the way he did. Reese sat very still. And now, Ava looked down at the rifle. Now I've done it. I've done the thing. And I can feel it, Master Chief. I can feel the wall. It's already there. It went up the second I put my eye to that scope, and it hasn't come down, and I don't know if it ever will. She looked at him with terror in her eyes, the specific terror of a person who has glimpsed her own future and found it lonely. I don't want to disappear. I don't want to become a wall, but I don't know how to have the gift and not have the wall. My father couldn't do it, and I'm so afraid I can't either. And there it was, the thing beneath the thing, the real fear that had driven her invisibility for 7 years. Not the fear of dying, the fear of vanishing while still alive, of becoming her father, of paying the price he paid and losing everything he lost. Reese was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was slow and careful, like a man laying stones across a river. Your daddy built a wall, he said. That's true. I watched him build it. But Ava, he built it alone. That was his mistake. He thought the wall was the price of the gift, and that they came together, that if you had the one, you had to have the other. He thought he had to carry it alone. Reese leaned forward. But he was wrong. The wall isn't the price of the gift. The wall is the price of carrying it alone. And you're not going to carry it alone. You hear me? I made a promise to your father, and I've been trying to keep it for 7 years, and I finally understand what it means. It doesn't mean watching over you from a distance. It means standing next to you. It means being the person you can share the truth with so you don't have to build a wall to hold it. He gripped her hand hard. You're not going to disappear, Ava, because I'm not going to let you. That's the promise. That's the real promise, not to protect your future, to make sure you're not alone in it. Ava looked at this old man, this friend of her father's, this keeper of a 15-year-old promise, and something in her chest that had been locked shut for 7 years cracked open, and she wept. Not the silent tears of the valley, the real thing, the grief and the fear and the relief all at once, the whole 7 years of it, and Reese pulled her into his arms and held her the way her father would have held her and let her cry. Outside, the base hummed on unaware. An hour later, they came for her. It was a full colonel this time flown in, special, a man named Whitmore with cold eyes and a clipboard, in the particular manner of an officer who thinks in terms of assets and capabilities rather than people. He set up in the operations tent, and he had Ava brought in, and he had her sit across a table from him, and he began to ask his questions. Specialist Collins, he said, I've read the preliminary reports. 10 enemy KIA, all from elevated positions, all attributed to a single shooter from the valley floor in approximately 18 minutes. He looked up from his clipboard. That single shooter is you. Yes, sir. You're a communications specialist. Yes, sir. Explain to me how a communications specialist makes 10 kills across 2 ridgelines in 18 minutes when I've got trained scout snipers who couldn't do that on their best day. Ava was quiet for a moment. My father taught me, sir. Your father. Whitmore consulted his clipboard. Staff Sergeant Daniel Collins, deceased. Yes, I've got that here. Says he was a sniper. He set the clipboard down. Specialist, I'm going to be straight with you because I think you've earned straight. What you did out there is extraordinary. It's the kind of thing that, frankly, we can use. There's a shortage of people who can do what you just proved you can do. And I'm authorized to offer you a Path Reclassification Advanced Training assignment to a unit where your capabilities would be... No, sir. Whitmore stopped. I beg your pardon. With respect, sir. Ava kept her voice level. I appreciate the offer, but no, I'm a communications specialist. That's what I'm going to stay. The colonel's cold eyes narrowed. Specialist, I don't think you understand what I'm offering you. I understand it perfectly, sir. And she did. She understood it better than he did because she'd watched it happen to her father. You're offering to make me into a weapon you can point at things. And I'm telling you no. Not because I can't, not because I'm afraid, but because the day I say yes to that is the day I stop being a person and start being a tool. I've watched that happen to someone I loved. I'm not going to let it happen to me. The tent was silent. Whitmore stared at her and his jaw tightened, and Ava could see him recalculating, could see him deciding whether to push, whether to make it an order, whether to colonel. Reese's voice from the entrance of the tent. He'd been standing there unnoticed, and now he stepped forward, and there was steel in his voice that even a full colonel had to reckon with. A word, if I may, outside. Whitmore looked annoyed. Master Chief, this is a debrief. A word, Colonel. Reese didn't raise his voice, but he didn't have to. Now, they went outside. Ava sat alone in the tent, the rifle across her knees, and she couldn't hear the words. But she could hear the tone, and she could see through the gap in the tent flap the two men standing close. Reese talking low and hard and steady, and Whitmore listening, and in the colonel's posture slowly changing, the rigid officiousness of him softening into something else. When they came back in, Whitmore's cold eyes were different. Not warm men like that don't get warm, but different. Chastened, maybe. Reese had told him something out there, something about Daniel Collins, something about what the Army had done to the Ghost and what it had cost, and it had landed. Specialist Collins, Whitmore said, and his voice had changed. I'm going to note in my report that you performed your duties as a communications specialist, and that when your unit came under overwhelming fire and faced imminent destruction, you took up a weapon and defended your fellow soldiers with exceptional skill and courage. I'm going to recommend you for a decoration commensurate with that action. He paused. And I'm going to note that you've declined reclassification, and I'm going to respect that decision. You'll remain a communications specialist. Is that acceptable to you? Ava let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Whitmore gathered his clipboard. Thank the Master Chief. He made a fairly compelling argument. He stood, and for a moment he looked at her. Really looked at her, the person, instead of the asset. For what it's worth, specialist, I've been doing this a long time. I've read a lot of reports. I've never read one like the one I'm about to write. He nodded once, a gesture of respect. Your father would be proud. And after he'd gone, Ava sat there in the quiet tent, and she thought about how everyone kept saying that. Your father would be proud. And she thought about how none of them understood except maybe Reese, now that pride wasn't the thing. That her father, wherever he was, wasn't proud. He was sad. Sad and proud and grieving and understanding all at once the way he'd been about everything to do with the gift. That evening, as the sun went down over FOB Liberty, Ava walked out to the edge of the wire to the same spot where Reese had told her about the promise, and she stood there with her father's rifle in her hands and looked out at the mountains going purple in the dusk. She heard footsteps behind her. She knew the gate before she turned. Heavy, deliberate, a big man moving carefully. Cole. Chief Garrett Cole came and stood beside her at the wire, and for a long time he didn't say anything. He just looked out at the mountains with her. I keep trying to figure out how to say it, he finally said. I've been trying all day. Every way I come up with sounds wrong, sounds cheap. I'm sorry, that's not enough. I was wrong, that's not enough either. He shook his head. There isn't a word big enough for what I owe you, and there isn't a word small enough for what I did to you. Chief, let me finish, please. He turned to face her. I shoved you into a wall. I told you that you were worth nothing. I told you that you were the kind of soldier that gets people killed. And then you... His voice broke. He was not a man who cried, and he was very close to it. And then you ran through open fire to save Ward, and you picked up your dead father's rifle, and you saved my life, and the lives of every man in that valley. Me. The guy who told you that you'd hide and pray the real soldiers kept you alive. He laughed a broken, terrible sound. You were the real soldier. The whole time. You were the realest one there. And I couldn't see it because He stopped. Because I decided who you were before I ever gave you a chance to show me. Ava looked at him. Do you want to know why you couldn't see it? She asked quietly. Cole nodded. Because I didn't want you to. She turned back to the mountains. I spent 11 days on this base making sure nobody saw it, making sure I was exactly what you thought I was, invisible, ordinary, beneath notice. You didn't fail to see the truth, Chief. I hid it from you, from everybody. So don't carry it like it was your blindness. It was my disguise. And it was a good one. It kept me safe for 7 years. Cole was quiet for a moment. Safe from what? Ava considered the question, and she found to her surprise that she wanted to answer it honestly. That something had shifted in her out in that valley, some barrier come down, and that this man who had despised her and now stood shattered beside her had somehow earned the truth. From this, she said, from being seen, from people looking at me the way you're looking at me right now. Like I'm something nothing more than a person. Like I'm a legend, or a weapon, or a miracle. She shook her head. My father was all those things to people. And it's lonely, Chief. Being those things, people stop seeing you as a person. They only see the thing you can do. And I didn't want that. I wanted to just be a girl, a comms hand, somebody nobody looked at twice. She let out a breath. And now that's gone. It's gone forever. And I'm grieving it honestly. I'm grieving the invisibility because I know what's coming. I've seen it. I watched it eat my father alive. Cole listened to all of it, and when she was done, he was quiet for a long time. And then he said something that surprised her. I can't give you the invisibility back, he said. Nobody can. That's gone, and I'm sorry it's gone. And I'm part of the reason it's gone because I'm one of the people who saw. He turned to her. But I can give you something else. I can see you as a person. I know I didn't earn the right to say that after what I did, but I'm telling you from here on out, when I look at you, I'm going to work to see the person. Not the legend, not the weapon. The person, Ava Collins. The girl who ran through fire to save a man she barely knew. That's a person to me, not a miracle. A person who made a choice. He put out his hand. And I'd be honored if you'd let me stand with you, however this goes. Whatever comes next, you saved my life. The least I can do is have your back for the rest of mine. Ava looked at his outstretched hand, and then she looked at his face, at the ruin of the arrogance that had been there that morning, at the raw, honest thing that had replaced it. And she understood that this, too, was something her father had never had. Her father had built his wall alone. But here at the edge of the wire, in the space of a single day, she had found two men, and an old master chief and a hard-bitten chief who'd hated her, who were offering to stand on the other side of the wall with her, to not let her disappear. She took his hand. Thank you, Chief, she said. Cole, he said. Just Cole. I think we're past rank, you and me. She almost smiled. Cole. They stood there at the wire as the last of the light drained out of the sky, and the stars came out over the Afghan mountains, an old lion and a broken chief and the ghost daughter. And for the first time in 7 years, Ava Collins did not feel alone with the weight of what she was. But even as she felt that, even as the comfort of it settled into her, some part of her mind, the part that never stopped working, the part her father had built, was already turning to what came next. Because she'd been in the army long enough to know that a thing like this didn't just end. A thing like this had consequences that rippled outward. There would be the report, and the report would go up the chain, and somewhere up that chain, someone would read it who didn't care about her father or her promises or the person she was trying to protect. Someone who would only see the things she could do. And she was right to worry, because 600 miles away in a secure facility she'd never heard of a report was already landing on a desk. And the man behind that desk read it twice and then a third time, and then he picked up a phone. Get me everything on Daniel Collins, he said, the one they called Ghost, and everything on the daughter. He set down the report, and he looked at the single line he'd underlined, the line about 10 targets in 18 minutes. I think we just found exactly who we've been looking for. But Ava didn't know that yet. Out at the wire under the stars, she only knew that the sun had set on the longest day of her life, and that she had survived it, and that she was not, after all, entirely alone. She stood between Cole and the darkness, her father's rifle in her hands, and she looked up at the stars and she spoke to a man who wasn't there. I broke the promise, Daddy, she whispered. Mama's promise, I broke it. She swallowed. But I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. It was never about the rifle. It was about seeing the truth and acting on it before it's too late. And today I saw the truth, and I acted. A tear traced down her face, silver in the starlight. I hope that's what you wanted. I hope you're not too sad. I hope wherever you are, you understand." And the wind moved through the wire and stirred her hair. And for just a moment, Ava Collins could have sworn she felt a rough hand settle over hers on the stock of the rifle and heard a voice faint as memory say the words he'd said 1,000 times in the woods of Montana. "Breathe out, Ava Bug. Between heartbeats. That's when the world holds still." She breathed out. And the world held still. The man behind the desk, 600 miles away, was named Everett Kane, and he had spent 20 years learning how to find people like Ava Collins. He was a civilian now, technically, though the word meant less than nothing in his world. He ran a program that didn't have a name on any organizational chart, funded through channels that didn't appear in any budget, tasked with a mission that officially didn't exist. His job was to find the ones with the gift, the rare, irreplaceable few who could do the impossible things, and to acquire them one way or another before anyone else did. He'd been doing it a long time. He was very good at it. And when the report from the Zarghun Valley crossed his desk, he knew with the certainty of a man who'd built his life around recognizing exactly this, that he'd found something extraordinary. 10 targets, he said again to the woman standing across the desk from him. Her name was Sarah Voss, and she was the closest thing Kane had to a right hand. 2 ridge lines, 18 minutes, from the valley floor uphill into dug-in positions. And she's a communications specialist who hadn't fired a rifle in 7 years. "So the file says," Voss replied. "So the file says." Kane leaned back. "You know how many people on Earth can do what that report describes? I could count them on my fingers, and most of them are on my payroll or dead or too old to be useful." He tapped the report. "Her father was one, Daniel Collins, the ghost. We tried to recruit him, back in the day, before your time." "What happened?" "He said no." Kane smiled thinly. "Said he'd rather stay in the army where at least the killing had rules. Then he went and got himself blown up on a road in Kandahar, and we lost the best natural shooter of his generation." He straightened. "I'm not going to make that mistake twice. The daughter has the same gift. Maybe better, the report says. She did it cold, no warm-up, no ranging shots. That's not training, Voss. That's blood. That's something you were born with." He picked up the phone. "I want her. Get me a channel to whoever's got authority over that base, and find out everything about her. What she wants, what she's afraid of, what she loves." He paused. "Everybody's got a lever. Find hers." 1,200 miles from that office back at FOB Liberty, Ava Collins woke before dawn on her 12th day on base, and for one merciful moment before memory returned, she was just a comms hand again. And then it came back, the valley, the rifle, the 10 shots, the whole impossible day, and she lay on her cot in the dark and felt the weight of it settle back onto her chest. She got up, she dressed, and she went to see Ethan Ward. They'd kept him at the base rather than evacuating him. Further, the wound was serious but stable, and the base surgeon had wanted to monitor him before moving him. Ava found him awake in the medical tent, propped up on pillows, his leg wrapped and elevated, and when he saw her come in, his face did something complicated. "Collins," he said, "I was hoping you'd come. How's the leg?" "Still attached, which the docs tell me is your doing." He gestured to the chair beside his cot. "Sit, please. I've been lying here for a day and a half with nothing to do but think, and most of what I've been thinking about is you." Ava sat. "Ward." "Ethan. After what we went through, I think you can call me Ethan." He shifted, wincing. "Listen, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get through it. That rifle. Your father's rifle." He looked at her. "You want to know how I ended up carrying it?" Ava went still. She'd wondered, of course. She'd wondered from the moment she'd seen the name in the stock. But she'd been afraid to ask, afraid of the answer, afraid of what it would mean. "Tell me," she said. "I came up through the sniper schoolhouse," Ethan said. "And there's a tradition there. The best rifles, the ones that belonged to the legends, they get passed down. Earned, not given. When a shooter proves himself, sometimes an instructor will hand him a weapon that belonged to somebody who came before. It's an honor. The biggest one there is." He looked at the rifle in Ava's hands. "My last week at the schoolhouse, my head instructor, old Master Sergeant named Boone, been there forever, he calls me into his office. And he's got this rifle, this one, and he says, 'Ward, this belonged to the best I ever trained. Man named Daniel Collins. We called him Ghost. He's gone now, killed in action, but this rifle's still got his eye in it. I've been holding on to it, waiting for someone worthy. And I think that's you. Ethan's voice was thick. I've carried it for 3 years, Collins. 3 years I've been carrying your father's rifle, and I never knew. I never once imagined that one day his daughter would take it out of my hands in the middle of a firefight and do the exact thing he was famous for. Bavo couldn't speak. Her eyes were wet. Some things find their way home, Ethan said quietly. I told you that in the valley. I meant it. That rifle traveled thousands of miles and passed through God knows how many hands, and it ended up back with the one person in the world it was always supposed to belong to. You can't tell me that's an accident. I don't believe that's an accident. I don't either, Ava whispered. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Ethan said, there's something else. Something you should know. His face grew serious. Yesterday, after they patched me up, I overheard the surgeon talking to somebody on a sat phone. Couldn't hear all of it, but I heard your name, and I heard the word acquisition. And I heard him say something about people coming from outside, not army. He looked at her. Collins, I've been around long enough to know what that means. There's people who collect shooters like you, people outside the regular chain. And when they hear about somebody who can do what you did, he shook his head. They come. They always come. Ava felt the cold settle in her gut, the same cold she'd felt looking at the map, the cold that told her the truth before her conscious mind caught up. When she asked, I don't know. Soon. Days, maybe. Ethan reached out and gripped her wrist. I'm telling you this because you saved my life and because that rifle in your hand says you're one of us whether you signed up for it or not. So watch yourself, Collins, because the people who come for shooters like you, they don't ask nice. And they don't take no. Ava thanked him and she left the medical tent and she walked out into the gray dawn with her mind working. Because Ethan had confirmed the thing she'd feared. The report had gone up the chain and someone had read it, and now the ripples were spreading outward and out. At the edge of those ripples was someone who wanted the thing she could do. She found Reese at the operations tent, already awake, already working a cup of coffee, cooling forgotten at his elbow. Master Chief, she said, we need to talk. She told him what Ethan had heard, and she watched Reese's weathered face grow grim, watched him set down his pen, watched him rub his eyes with the heels of his hands, like a man who'd hoped he wouldn't have to face this and had known all along he would. Kane, he said finally. Who? Everett Kane. Reese's voice was heavy. I don't know for sure it's him, but if there's people coming for you from outside the chain looking to acquire a shooter, it's Kane, or it's someone like him working for Kane. He looked at her. He runs a program, black, off the books, been doing it for 20 years. He finds people with the gift and he collects them. For work the regular military won't touch. Work with no rules and no oversight and no coming back. Reese's jaw tightened. He tried to recruit your father once. Ava went very still. When, years ago, before you were born or right around then, Reese met her eyes. Your daddy told me about it. Kane came to him with an offer. Money, freedom, the chance to use the gift without the Army's restrictions. And your father said no. Flat no. And you want to know what Kane said to him? Reese's voice dropped. Kane said, that's fine, Sergeant. You say no today, but the gift doesn't stay quiet forever. One day it'll come out, and when it does, you'll wish you had somewhere to point it. And I'll be there. Reese shook his head slowly. Your father never forgot that. He said it was the only time in his life a conversation scared him. Because the man wasn't wrong, the gift doesn't stay quiet forever. It came out for your father over and over for 15 years. And now, he looked at her, now it's come out for you. And Kane's coming, Ava said quietly. Kane's coming. Ava sat down slowly across from him. Her mind was racing, running the geometry of it, the angles the same way she'd read the valley. Because this was a different kind of battlefield, but it was a battlefield all the same, and she'd been trained her whole life to see them. He can't force me, she said. I'm active duty Army. I've got a chain of command. He won't force you. Reese's voice was grim. That's not how he works. He'll find your lever. He'll find the thing you want or the thing you're afraid of, and he'll press on it until you say yes and think it was your own idea. He leaned forward. So the question is, Ava, what's your lever? Because whatever it is, he's already looking for it. And Ava thought about it. She thought about what she wanted and what she feared. And the cold in her gut got colder because she realized she knew exactly what her lever was. She'd told it to Cole at the wire the night before. She'd told it to Reese in this very tent. The wall, the fear of becoming her father, the fear of disappearing behind the gift. If Cain knew about that, if Cain understood that the thing she feared most in all the world was becoming a weapon someone pointed at things, then he would know exactly how to get her. He wouldn't threaten her. He'd offer her the opposite of her fear. He'd offer her control. He'd offer her a way to use the gift on her own terms, to never be pointed, to be the one doing the pointing. He'd offer her the illusion of being the one thing she was afraid of, not being a person and not a tool. And it would be a lot, but it would be a good one, the best kind, the kind built out of a truth. He's going to offer me control, she said slowly. That's the lever. He's going to tell me he can give me a way to have the gift without becoming what my father became. And that's Master Chief. That's the exact thing I want most. That's the thing I've been afraid I can't have. Reese looked at her with something like fear in his eyes, because he understood too how good the lever was, how hard it would be to refuse. Then we have to make sure, he said, that before he ever opens his mouth, you already know the truth, that the thing he's offering can't be real. Because a man like Cain, the second you're inside his program, you belong to him. There's no control, there's no terms. There's just the work, and the work never ends, and it takes you apart piece by piece the same way it took your father apart, except your father at least had rules and Cain doesn't have any. He gripped her hand. Whatever he offers you, Ava, however good it sounds, it's the wall. Dressed up pretty, but it's the wall. 2 days later, Cain came. He came in a plain aircraft with no markings, and he came with paperwork that opened every door on the base, and he came with Sarah Voss and 2 other people who moved like operators and said nothing. And he asked to meet with Specialist Ava Collins alone in a private room, and the base command, outranked by paperwork, they didn't understand from an authority they couldn't identify, had no choice but to comply. But Ava was not alone, not really, because before Cain arrived, she and Reese and Cole had done the thing her father had taught her to do. They had read the battlefield, they had wargamed it, they had figured out what Cain would say and how he would say it, and they had prepared. Cain was not what Ava expected. She'd built a picture of a hard man, a cold man, a predator. And Cain was those things underneath. But on the surface, he was warm, charming, almost fatherly. He was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and an easy smile, and when Ava walked into the room, he rose to greet her like an old friend. Specialist Collins, he said, extending his hand. Everett Cain, it's an honor, a real honor. His grip was firm and dry. I knew your father. Did they tell you that a long time ago? Finest natural shooter I ever encountered. Until now. Until now, Ava repeated. Sit, please. Sit. He gestured to a chair. I've come a long way to talk to you, and I don't want to waste your time, so let me be direct. I've read the report from the Valley. I've read it more times than I care to admit, and I'm going to tell you something that no one else on this base is going to tell you because they don't understand it, and you do. He leaned forward, his kind eyes intent. What you have is a gift, a real one, rarer than you know. And this, he gestured at the base around them. This is not a place that knows what to do with it. They'll pin a medal on you, they'll write you up, and then they'll put you back in a comms tent and waste you because the regular army doesn't have the imagination to use what you are. He smiled. I do. Ava said nothing. She let him talk. That was the plan. Let him lay out the whole thing, let him show her the lever so she could see it clearly and refuse it clearly. Here's what I'm offering, Cain went on. A place where your gift is understood, where it's valued, where you're not a communications specialist who happens to be able to shoot, but a specialist whose only job is the thing you're best at in all the world. And this is the part they'll never offer you, Ava. So listen close, a place where you're in control, where you choose the missions, where you're not pointed at things like a weapon, but where you do the pointing, where the gift is yours, on your terms, instead of the Army's on theirs. He sat back. I think that's what you want. More than anything. I think you're terrified of becoming what your father became, a tool hollowed out, used up. And I'm offering you the one thing that can save you from that. Control. Ownership. The gift without the wall. And there it was. Exactly what she predicted. Word for word almost. The lever pressed with a surgeon's precision. For a moment, one moment it worked. For one moment, Ava felt the pull of it, felt how badly she wanted it to be true, felt the 7 years of fear reach up and grab at the thing he was dangling in front of her. Because he was right. It was what she wanted. It was the exact shape of her deepest longing. And that was how she knew it was a lie. "You knew my father," she said quietly. "I did." "Then you know he said no to you." Kane's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes. "He did, to his loss. And if I may say so to yours, if your father had come with me, he might still be alive. He wouldn't have died on that road in Kandahar. He'd have died old in a bed with you beside him. Or he'd have died in some war with no name in some country he wasn't allowed to tell me about for some reason nobody would ever explain." Ava's voice was steady. "You told him something once, when he said no. Do you remember what you told him?" Kane's smile faded just slightly. "You told him the gift doesn't stay quiet forever," Ava said. "You told him that one day it would come out, and when it did, he'd wish he had somewhere to point it, and you'd be there." She leaned forward. "And you were right. It came out, over and over, for 15 years. And you know what he did with it, Mr. Kane? He pointed it at the things that were trying to kill the men beside him. And then he came home to his wife and his daughter, and he was sad and he was tired. And there was a wall in him, but on the other side of that wall, there was still a man. There was still my father, because he had somewhere to come home to. He had people who saw him. He had rules that gave the killing a shape, even when the shape was ugly." Her voice grew hard. "And what you're offering me is a place with no wife and no daughter and no rules and no coming home. You're not offering me control, Mr. Kane. You're offering me the wall with nothing on the other side of it. You're offering me my father's curse without my father's family. And I'd rather die a calm's hand than take it." The room was silent, and Everett Kane, the man who had spent 20 years finding people like Ava Collins and pressing their levers until they said yes, looked at the daughter of the one man who had ever refused him, and he understood that she was going to refuse him too. And for a moment, his kind eyes went flat and cold, and Ava saw at last the predator underneath. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "The same mistake your father made, and it cost him everything." "It cost him his life," Ava said. "You're right about that. But it didn't cost him everything, because he died as himself. He died as Daniel Collins' husband and father, not as a tool in somebody's program. And when he died," her voice caught, then steadied. "When he died, there was a daughter who loved him enough to spend 7 years honoring a promise, and a master chief who spent 7 years keeping a promise to look after her, and men who whisper his name at a sniper schoolhouse a world away. That's not nothing, Mr. Kane. That's not a man who lost in everything. That's a man who kept the one thing that mattered, himself." She stood, "And I intend to do the same." Kane stood too slowly. The warmth was gone from him now entirely. "This isn't over," he said. "You have a rare gift, Specialist Collins, and people with rare gifts don't get to just walk away. The world doesn't work that way. Sooner or later, there's a shot only you can make, a situation only you can solve. And when that day comes, you'll be there," Ava finished. "I know. You told my father the same thing." She looked him dead in the eye. "And here's what I'll tell you the same as he would have. Maybe you're right. Maybe someday there's a shot only I can make. And maybe I'll make it. But I'll make it my way for my reasons, standing next to the people I choose. Not yours. Never yours. Because I finally understand the thing my father tried to teach me my whole life. The gift was never the shooting. It was the seeing. And I see you, Mr. Kane. I see exactly what you are. And I'm turning away from it. That's the gift, not the shot, the turning away." For a long moment, Kane held her gaze. And then slowly something in his expression shifted. Not defeat. Exactly, men like Kane don't feel defeat, but a kind of grim recalculation. He gathered his papers. He nodded to Voss, who had stood silent by the door the entire time. "Your father would be proud," he said, and there was something almost genuine in it. Some old ghost of respect for the man who'd refused him 30 years before. "God help me, I think he actually would." He moved toward the door, and then he stopped, and he turned back, and he said one last thing. "But proud isn't the word, is it?" he said softly. "You know that better than anyone." He wouldn't be proud, Ava. He'd be sad. Because he'd know that saying no to me doesn't make the gift go away. It just means you carry it alone in a world that doesn't understand it, and one day it'll come out again, and there won't be anyone like me offering you a place to put it. There'll just be you and the gift and the wall." His eyes were almost gentle. "I'm the only one who is ever going to understand you completely, and you just sent me away. Live with that." And then he was gone. Ava stood alone in the room for a long time after the door closed, and she realized with a slow horror that Cain had gotten in one last cut, and it was a good one, and it was aimed at the exact place her armor was thinnest. Because he was right that saying no didn't make the gift go away. He was right that she'd carry it in a world that didn't understand it. He was right, most of all, that her father wouldn't be proud, he'd be sad, and the fact that Cain knew that Cain understood the sadness at the heart of the gift better than almost anyone alive made his offer harder to have refused, not easier. The door opened. Reese came in and Cole behind him, and they found her standing alone with her arms wrapped around herself. "He's gone," Reese said. "Cleared the gate, wheels up in 20. He crossed to her. "You did it, Ava. You said no. Same as your daddy." He said, Ava's voice was unsteady. He said I'd carry it alone, in a world that doesn't understand it. He said he was the only one who'd ever understand me completely, and I sent him away, and now he's a liar. Cole's voice was flat and hard. That's what men like him do. They find the true thing you're afraid of, and they wrap a lie around it, and they hand it to you like a gift. He's not the only one who understands you, Collins. That's the lie. That's the whole lie. He stepped closer. You've got the Master Chief who knew your daddy for 15 years. You've got Ward lying in a med tent with your father's rifle's whole history in his head. You've got me, and God knows I don't deserve to be on the list, but I'm on it because you put me there when you saved my life. You are not alone, Ava. Cain needs you to believe you're alone, because a person who believes they're alone is a person he can own. Don't give him that. Don't you dare give him that. Ava looked at Cole and then at Reese, and she felt the lie Cain had planted begin slowly to lose its grip. He understands the gift, she said quietly. That's the thing. He understands it better than anybody. The sadness of it. He got that part right. He understands the gift, Reese agreed, but he doesn't understand you. There's a difference, Ava, and it's the whole difference in the world. Cain understands the gift the way a man understands a tool, what it can do, how to use it, how much it's worth. But he doesn't understand the person carrying it. He can't, because to him, you're not a person. You're a capability. That's all you'll ever be to him. Reese put his hands on her shoulders. But to me, you're Danny's little girl, Ava Bug. The kid he talked about in the hides at 3 a.m. To Cole, you're the person who ran through fire to save his sorry life. To Ward, you're the one the rifle was always meant for. We don't understand the gift the way Cain does. We understand you. And that's the thing that keeps the wall from having nothing behind it. Not somebody who understands your gift, somebody who understands your heart. And Ava, who had spent 7 years afraid of exactly this moment, the moment the gift came out and someone came to claim it, and she had to choose, understood finally that she had already made the choice, and that it was the right one, and that her father had made the same choice 30 years before her, and had never once regretted it, even at the end, even on that road in Kandahar. No, she had chosen to be the person, not a weapon, not a legend, not a capability, a person standing among people who saw her. He's going to come back, she said. Cain, he said this isn't over. Maybe, Reese said. Probably. Men like him don't give up on something they want. But if he comes back, he squeezed her shoulders. He comes back to all of us, not just you. That's the thing he didn't count on. He thinks he found a lone shooter he can pick off from a distance. A grim smile crossed the old Master Chief's face. He didn't. He found a shooter with people behind her. And that's a whole different kind of target. Outside, faintly, they heard the whine of an aircraft spooling up, and then the roar of it taking off, carrying Everett Cain and Sarah Voss and their silent operators away from FOB Liberty. Ava listened to it climb and fade, listened to the sound of the man who wanted to own her disappearing into the sky, and she felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not peace. It wasn't peace. The gift didn't allow peace, and she knew now that it never would. But something adjacent to peace, something like resolve, something like the feeling her father must have felt 30 years ago in a room a lot like this one, when he'd told the same man no and walked away and gone home to his wife and his little girl. She'd broken her mother's promise in the valley. She could never take that back. But she was keeping something else now, something her mother had actually wanted underneath the promise she was keeping her soul. She was refusing to disappear. She was choosing over and over in every moment that mattered to be a person and not a tool. And that she understood at last was the real inheritance. Not the gift, not the rifle, not the deadly, sorrowful skill in her hands. The choice. Her father had given her the choice, the same way his own hard years had given it to him, and she was making it the way he'd made it, and somewhere beyond this world, she was certain he could see her making it, and he wasn't sad anymore. For this one thing, this one choice, she thought maybe, just maybe, he actually was proud. She picked up her father's rifle from where it leaned against the wall, and she held it, and she looked at the name carved in the stock, worn smooth by two hands across two generations. Daniel Collins, Desert Storm, 91. "Okay, Daddy," she whispered. "Okay, I heard you. I finally heard you." And outside the window, the last sound of Kane's aircraft faded into nothing, and the bass went on around her, and the mountain stood silent in the distance. And for the first time since the valley, Ava Collins did not feel the wall closing around her heart. She felt hands on the other side of it. And she was not alone. Kane came back 3 weeks later, and he did not come with paperwork and charm. He came with a problem that only Ava Collins could solve, and he came knowing that this time she would have no choice but to listen. Because this time the shot he needed wasn't about the gift or the program or the wall. This time it was about lives, real lives on a real clock, and Kane had learned in the long weeks since the valley that the way to reach a person who couldn't be bought was to find a situation where saying no meant people died. It started with a call to the operations tent at 0600, and it came not through Kane directly, but through the regular chain, which was how Ava knew immediately that something was wrong. Reese took the call, and Ava watched his face change as he listened, watched the old Master Chief go still in the way. He only went still when the news was bad. "Say again," Reese said into the phone. "All of them." A pause. "How long do they have?" A longer pause. "And there's no other asset in range." His eyes came up and found Ava's across the tent. "Understood. Stand by." He set down the phone. "There's a recon team," he said. 4 men, deep in country past the range of any support we've got. They walked into something they shouldn't have, an ambush, a big one coordinated. 3 of them are wounded, they're holed up in a compound, and there's a force closing in on them, and they can't move because of the wounded, and they can't hold because there's too many coming. His jaw was tight. Air's grounded again, sandstorm rolling through the whole sector. Zero visibility for rotary wing. QRF can't reach them in time. They've got maybe 2 hours before they're overrun. "And the shot?" Ava asked, because she already knew there was a shot. She could feel it coming the same way she felt everything coming a half step ahead of the words. "There's a ridge," Reese said, "overlooking the compound, about 1,200 meters out. If someone could get on that ridge, they could cover the recon team's withdrawal break, up the assault long enough for them to move the wounded and link up with the QRF at the extraction point." He paused. "It's a hard position to reach and a harder set of shots to make. Extreme range, high wind from the storm front, moving targets, and whoever takes it has to hold it alone because there's no one to send with them." He looked at her. "Command's asking for volunteers with the skill to do it, and there's exactly one person in range who has that skill." Ava was quiet. "There's one more thing," Reese said, and his voice went hard. "The person who flagged this for us, the one who made sure the request came to you specifically, who made sure your name was in the system as the nearest qualified shooter." He met her eyes. "It's Kane. He's the one who routed it here. He's watching Ava. He wants to see what you'll do. He engineered this to put you in exactly this position, a shot only you can make, lives on the line, no way out but through. This is his answer to your no. He told you there'd be a shot only you could make. Well, here it is, and he made sure of it." And there it was, the trap inside the tragedy. Kane had learned that Ava couldn't be bought with promises, so he'd found the one lever she truly couldn't refuse. 4 men who would die if she didn't act. He'd turned her own gift against her, turned the very thing that made her a person. Her refusal to let hesitation kill the people who needed her into the string he'd use to pull her exactly where he wanted her. For a moment, the injustice of it burned so hot in Ava that she could barely see. He'd taken the noblest thing about her and made it into a leash. And then the burning passed, and what was left underneath it was clear and cold and certain. "It doesn't matter," she said quietly. Reese blinked. "What?" It doesn't matter that Kane set it up. It doesn't matter that it's a trap. It doesn't matter that he's watching, or that he thinks this proves something, or that he's going to use it to try to own me. Ava stood and she reached for her father's rifle where it leaned against the wall. 4 men are going to die in 2 hours if nobody takes that ridge. That's the only fact that matters. Everything else Kane thinks he's doing, the leverage, the lesson, the game, that's his story. It's not mine. My story is 4 men in a compound who need somebody to see the truth and act before hesitation kills them. She checked the rifle with hands that did not shake. And I can see it, and I can act, so I'm going to. Cole, who had come in halfway through and heard the last of it, stepped forward. Then you're not going alone. I don't care what the tasking says about one shooter. I'm driving you to that ridge, and I'm carrying your gear, and I'm watching your back while you work, and Kane can choke on it. Cole, that wasn't a question, Collins. His jaw was set. You said it yourself 3 weeks ago. Kane wants you to believe you're alone. Every part of this is designed to make you feel like it's just you and the gift in the wall. Well, it's not. It's you and the gift and me and the Master Chief on the radio and 4 men who are going to go home because of you. He picked up his own kit. He built a trap for a lone shooter. He's going to get a shooter with her people around her. Let's go show him the difference. They reached the ridge 90 minutes later after a hard drive that took them to the very edge of what the vehicle could handle, and then a climb on foot that took them the rest of the way, Cole hauling Ava's gear up the last brutal stretch while she conserved her strength for the work. The storm front was rolling in from the west, a wall of dust turning the sky the color of an old bruise, and the wind was rising, gusting hard and unpredictable. Exactly the kind of wind that made a 1,200-meter shot into something most snipers would call impossible. Ava settled into position on the ridge, her father's rifle in her hands, and below her 1,200 meters away, she could see the compound where 4 American soldiers were fighting for their lives, and she could see the assaulting force moving to overrun them, and she could see in that terrible clear way she'd been born, seeing exactly how the next 20 minutes were going to go if she didn't change them. Talk to me, Master Chief, she said into the radio, her voice already dropping into the flat calm she'd carried out of the valley. Where are they? Reese's voice came back, patched through from the operations tent coordinating with the recon team's own comms. Recon teams in the main structure north end of the compound. Wounded are with them. Assaulting forces coming from the south and east command counts maybe 15 shooters moving in bounds. Recon team lead says they can't move the wounded until that pressure comes off. Copy. Ava scanned it through her scope. The wind pulled at the dust and she read the whole 1,200 meters of it, the near wind and the far wind, the way it moved through the low ground and swirled around the compound, a shifting, treacherous thing that would push a bullet feet off target if she didn't account for every foot of it. Her father's voice in her memory from a windy day on a Montana ridge 2 decades gone. The wind isn't one thing, Ava Bug. It's 100 things, all the way to the target. You don't shoot through wind, you shoot through weather. Read the whole distance or don't take the shot. She read the whole distance. First target, she said, southeast corner. He's setting up a support weapon. If he gets it running, he'll pin the recon team so the others can close. She dialed her wind, her elevation, everything, and she settled and she breathed, and Cole, spotting beside her, watched 1,200 meters of dust and wind between her and a target he could barely see, and did not believe in his heart that anyone could make the shot. Breathe out, Ava whispered to herself, between heartbeats. The world held still. She squeezed. The rifle bucked, and a full 1.5 seconds later, the round crossing. All that impossible distance, the man setting up the support weapon at the southeast corner folded and did not get up, and the weapon fell silent before it ever spoke. Cole let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. My God, he said, 1,200 meters, in this wind. You. Next target, Ava said, already moving, because there was no time for awe. There was only the work. Down in the compound, the recon team felt it happen. They didn't know how, they didn't know who, but they felt the assault falter, felt the deadly pressure from the southeast simply vanish, and their team lead's voice came across the radio, ragged and disbelieving. We just lost their SE gun. Somebody dropped their gunner. We've got somebody covering us. Who do we have? Who's out there? Reese's voice steady as a stone. You've got the best there is, son. Move your wounded. Now, while the window's open. She'll keep it open. She'll keep it open. And Ava did. Target after target across that impossible distance, through that treacherous wind, she read the battlefield, and she broke the assault apart. A shooter moving to flank, she led him through the wind and dropped him mid-stride. A spotter directing the assault from a covered position, she found the one angle that reached him and took it. A group of three trying to rush the compound's south wall, she engaged them in a sequence so fast and so precise that to the men below it seemed the very air had turned against them. She wasn't just killing. She was reading the enemy's plan faster than they could execute it, seeing each move before they made it, and countering it from 1,200 meters away with a rifle her father had carried through a different war. And with every shot the recon team moved, they got their wounded up. They started their withdrawal covered by a shooter they couldn't see, protected by a gift that had skipped a generation and come roaring back to life on a ridge in a sandstorm. "They're moving," Reese reported. "Recon teams out of the compound. They're heading for the extraction point. Q, RF's inbound to link up. Ava, they're going to make it. They're actually going to make it. Keep that pressure off them for 8 more minutes and they are home free." 8 minutes. Ava held the ridge for 8 minutes. 8 minutes of reading wind and range and movement. 8 minutes of the flat, calm, and the held breath and the world going still. 8 minutes of being the thing her father had been, the thing she'd sworn never to become, the thing that had turned out to be, at its heart, not about killing at all, but about 4 men getting to go home to people who loved them. And when the recon team linked up with the QRF at the extraction point, when the last of the wounded was loaded and the assault below had broken and scattered, when the storm finally closed over the whole sector and turned the world to blind and howling dust, Ava Collins lowered her father's rifle and she was still herself. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. She'd made the impossible shots. She'd done the terrible work. And the wall hadn't closed around her because Cole was beside her spotting and Reese was in her ear and 4 men were alive who wouldn't have been, and she was not alone, and so the gift had not hollowed her out. She'd carried it, and she'd stayed a person while she carried it. "They're clear," Reese said, and his voice cracked. "All 4, clear and extracting. Ava, you did it. You did it, girl." Ava lay on the ridge in the rising storm, her father's rifle warm against her, and she let the tears come, and Cole put a hand on her shoulder and didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say. And then Reese's voice came again, different now, quiet, careful. "Ava, there's one more thing you need to hear. About Kane." A pause. "He was patched into the command net, watching the whole thing, every shot, and 30 seconds ago he made a transmission. To me, he asked me to relay it to you word for word." Ava went still. "What did he say?" "He said," Reese's voice was strange. "He said, tell her she's wrong about me, and I'm wrong about her, and I finally understand the difference. He said, tell her I spent 20 years collecting people with the gift, and I was collecting the wrong thing. I was collecting the shot. She just showed me the shot was never the gift." Reese paused, and then he said, tell her the program's done. I'm shutting it down. Tell her Daniel Collins beat me twice, once with his no, and once with his daughter, and tell her, Reese's voice broke slightly, tell her he'd be proud. And this time I mean proud. Not sad, proud, because she did the thing he could never quite do. She carried it and she stayed whole. He never figured out how. She just showed me it can be done. Tell her that. And then he cleared the net. And Ava, Reese exhaled. He's gone, for real this time, not coming back. He meant it. Ava lay on the ridge in the storm and she wept, and she couldn't have said in that moment whether it was grief or relief or something with no name at all. Because Kane, cold predatory, Kane, the man who'd hunted her father and then her, had in the end been the one to say the thing she'd been waiting her whole life to hear. That her father would be proud, really proud, not sad. Proud because she'd solved the riddle he'd died without solving. The riddle was this: how do you have the gift and not lose yourself to it? And the answer, it turned out, was so simple that her father had missed it in all his solitary years. The answer wasn't to carry it better. It wasn't to be stronger or colder or more disciplined. The answer was to not carry it alone, to let people in, to have a Cole beside you and a Reese in your ear and 4 men alive because of you and a rifle passed down through hands that loved you. The gift hollowed you out only when you carried it by yourself. Shared it didn't hollow you at all. Shared, it was just a hard thing you did for people you loved and then came home from. Her father had built his wall alone, and it had cost him. But he'd taught her enough, the seeing, the choosing, the turning away, that she'd been able to find the thing he never found. People to stand on the other side of the wall. And in finding it, she'd freed him somehow across all the distance between the living and the dead. She'd finished the lesson he'd started. She'd shown that it could be done. They came down off the ridge together, Ava and Cole, into the teeth of the storm, and drove back through the blind and howling dust. And when they finally rolled through the gate at FOB Liberty, there was a crowd waiting again, the way there'd been after the valley. But it was different this time. Ava looked at them, all those faces, and she didn't feel the old dread, the old fear of being seen, because she understood now that being seen wasn't the danger. Being seen alone was the danger. And she wasn't alone. She'd never be alone again. Ethan Ward was there out of the med tent, now upright on crutches, his legs still wrapped but healing. And when Ava climbed down from the vehicle, he made his slow way to her, and he looked at the rifle in her hands, and he looked at her face, and he understood everything without being told. "You made the shots," he said, "the ones only you could make." "We made them," Ava said, and she looked at Cole and at Reese coming across the motor pool toward them. "All of us." That's the thing Kane never understood. There's no such thing as a shot only one person can make. There's only shots that one person takes with everybody they love standing behind them. Ethan smiled, and there were tears in his eyes. "Your father would—" "He's proud," Ava said, and she said it simply, certainly for the first time in 7 years, without the shadow of the sadness. "He's proud," Kane told me, and this time it's true. That night, after the debriefs and the reports and the mighty, slow unwinding of the day, Ava Collins walked out to the edge of the wire one more time, to the spot where Reese had first told her about the promise, where Cole had first offered her his hand, where she'd spoken to her father under the stars. And this time the three of them walked out with her, Reese and Cole and Ethan on his crutches. And they stood together at the wire and looked out at the mountains, black against a sky finally clearing of the storm. "What happens now?" Cole asked. "Kane's gone. The program's shut down. You're still a comms hand. Command's gonna pin a medal on you, and then what? You go back to fixing radios and pretending you're invisible?" Ava thought about it, and she found that the answer came easily now, without fear. "No," she said. "I'm done pretending to be invisible. That's over. I spent 7 years hiding because I thought the gift and the wall came together, and I was so afraid of the wall that I buried the gift. But I know better now, so I'm not going to hide it, and I'm not going to be ashamed of it, but I'm also not going to let it be the only thing I am." She looked at her father's rifle. "I'm going to be a comm specialist who can shoot when shooting saves lives. I'm going to be a person first, and a shooter second, and I'm going to stay a person no matter how many shots I have to take. That's the choice. That's the inheritance, not the gift. The choice about how to carry it." Reese put his weathered hand on her shoulder. "Your daddy," he said, "would have given anything to figure out what you just figured out. Anything in the world." "I know," Ava said softly, "but he couldn't figure it out alone. Nobody can. That's the whole point." She looked at the three men around her, the old Master Chief who'd kept a promise for 7 years, the hard chief who'd become her fiercest defender, the sniper who'd carried her father's rifle across a world to bring it home to her. You figure it out together, or you don't figure it out at all. They stood there in silence for a while, the four of them at the edge of the wire under the clearing sky. And Ava Collins looked up at the stars, and she found her father up there, somewhere the way she always did, and she spoke to him one last time. But this time she didn't whisper an apology. This time she didn't ask him not to be sad. This time she just told him the truth. "I understand now, Daddy," she said. "The gift was never about killing. It was about seeing the truth faster than anyone else and acting before hesitation kills the people you love. You taught me that, and you tried to teach me one more thing you never got to finish. You tried to teach me how to carry it without losing myself." She smiled up at the stars, and her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady and strong. "I finished it for you. I found the answer. You don't carry it alone. That's all. That's the whole secret you spent your life looking for. You just let people love you while you carry it." She lifted her hand to the stars the way a child waves to a parent. "I broke Mama's promise. I know I did, but I kept the one that mattered. I stayed myself. I stayed whole. And I'm not invisible anymore, and I'm not afraid anymore, and I'm not alone. Rest now, Daddy, rest. I've got it from here." And the wind moved through the wire, so now the storm passed, and for just a moment, the last time she somehow knew, the very last time Ava Collins felt a rough hand settle over hers, warm and certain and proud, and heard a voice faint at the starlight say the words he'd said 1,000 times in the green woods of a home a world away. Breathe out, Ava Bug. Between heartbeats, that's when the world holds still. She breathed out, and the world held still. And then the hand was gone, and the voice was gone, and what remained was not grief and not sadness, but something clean and whole, and finished a daughter who had inherited her father's gift, and in the end surpassed it not in skill but in wisdom, by learning the one thing he never could. The SEALs at FOB Liberty had no idea when she first arrived that the quiet comm specialist was a sniper. They found out in 18 minutes in a valley, and then again on a ridge in a storm, and by the time it was over, every one of them knew her name and would carry it the rest of their lives. But the truth was bigger than the story they'd tell. The truth was that Ava Collins had been given the deadliest gift a person can carry, and had found the only way to carry it without being destroyed by it, and in doing so had freed her father's ghost and kept her mother's deepest wish, and become at last exactly what she was born to be. Not the ghost, not the ghost's daughter even, just Ava Collins, whole and seen and unafraid, standing at the edge of the wire with the people who loved her father's rifle in her hands, and her father's peace in her heart at last. She was never invisible again, and she never needed to be.